Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Proof is Out There. Stories of UFO abductions are pretty common, but forensic evidence that corroborates such accounts is much harder to come by. So when two self-proclaimed victims of alien abduction claim to have proof, you know we have to take a look for ourselves. It's August 2014 in Salt Fork State Park, Ohio. Two men are out fishing at night when suddenly their lives are changed forever. Tom Workman, the state director of Ohio's Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, say these photos of what they were wearing may hold the clues to what they went through.
Roughly about 10:30, they saw a light coming across the sky to their north. An hour later, another set of lights comes by. And about 1:30 in the morning, they heard this extremely shrill woman's cry coming from across the lake. At that point, the 43-year-old sitting in a lawn chair, watching his fishing pole. The 19-year-old, he's baiting his hook. The next thing you know, the 43-year-old gets his cell phone out. And it's 5:19 in the morning. He has no idea what happened between 1:30 and 5:19. And the 19-year-old is still up baiting his hook over 3.5 hours later.
Author Jason Martell says the bewildered men then make a break for it. But that's when things get really weird.
Stunned in disbelief, they started to just grab all their belongings, change their clothes. And as the older man changed his clothes, he was also noticing his shirt was inside out.
It's as if his clothes have been taken off and put back on incorrectly. And they say they have no idea where these stains came from. The men believe these dirtied shorts and tops might carry evidence that they are victims of an alien abduction. If that's the case, their lost time would not be surprising.
There are many instances when there's some type of an alien abduction experience where missing time occurs. A very similar feature happened with the Betty and Barney Hill case.
The Hill couple famously forgot 2 hours while driving on a New Hampshire road one night in 1961. With the help of hypnosis, they later recounted being examined and probed by aliens.
In many of these experiences of lost time, there are physical attributes that also take place. Sometimes the clothes are put on wrong. A shirt is inside out.
Betty and Barney Hill were left with stopped watches, scuffed shoes, and a ripped dress. Is the clothing of the Ohio fishermen proof of a similar encounter? Okay, I know what you're thinking. Dirty clothes and a shirt turned inside out doesn't sound all that weird coming back from a camping trip. Still, the men claim they were so disturbed that they stayed home for weeks afterward. Perhaps our experts can shine a light on this mysterious blackout. First, we ask emergency medicine physician Dr. Ed Hope if there's any explanation for the experience of lost time reported here.
When people black out or lose consciousness, medically, we think of something happening either with the heart or something with the head. What's unusual in this case is that both of them blacked out at the same time, which kind of rules out a lot of these causes.
And what about their clothing? Astronomer Mark D'Antonio says an industrial chemist put it under spectroscopic analysis.
One of the findings in the clothing of both these two gentlemen and in Betty Hill's clothes was carboxylic acid.
Carboxylic acid salt is found in food additives, some pharmaceuticals, and soap. It's not rare, but Tom Workman argues that the placement of this otherwise ordinary chemical is what makes it noteworthy.
Betty Hill's dress was brand new, and it was in the lower part of the skirt where you would normally never associate that type of a chemical with.
And the chemist found the Salt Fork abductees' clothes were similarly affected.
She found it on the pockets of their, cargo shorts in areas that you would normally never find that type of a chemical at.
Yet, there might be a simple explanation. What if they were carrying hygiene products or medication in their pockets? Well, Workman points to areas of pinkish discoloration on both sets of garments, which might hold an even bigger clue.
The areas that discolored on Betty Hill's dark blue dress were around the lower part of the skirt area. And this is where she was claiming that aliens were grabbing at her. On the gentleman from Salt Fork, the blue jacket had a pink cast to it. So maybe something was touching that jacket.
Tom was so compelled by the Salt Fork incident, he went there, looking for additional physical evidence.
And as I'm walking the area, I hit a spot about 100 yards from where they were. And I looked down, and I was standing in a perfect circle of dead grass. So I took samples from that region and also control samples around the whole region.
Tom got the samples analyzed, and the findings, once again, appeared anomalous.
One position was much higher iron content than all the rest of the areas. That area was the circle I was standing in.
Does it mean that possibly there's some type of connection to iron and alien spacecraft? We can't say no, but one case doesn't prove anything.
Our verdict? If you take them at their word, this remains an unexplained case of lost time. We can't be sure whether it was caused by an alien abduction or something else altogether. Unfortunately for these two anonymous men, they may never know for sure where those hours went. Now, another UFO case. This one not from the woods, but from the desert. With the establishment of the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, it's clear the government is becoming more aware and worried about UFOs, especially around military targets, like this one. Take a look. April 20th, 2021. It's a quiet, crystal-clear evening in the skies over a Marine base near 29 Palms, California, in the Mojave Desert, until multiple reports suddenly come in of a strange set of lights appearing in the sky. The base's night vision cameras capture this. 5 orbs are hovering in a curved formation in the sky. They each contain a small, bright spot in the center, surrounded by a glowing aura.
It appears to be showing some type of arc of connected lights. But is this one object, or is it a collection of orbs staying in formation?
What's unusual about this sighting is that the people who reported it aren't your average bystanders.
Reportedly, over 50 people actually witnessed this strange phenomenon. A group of Marines who are all very familiar with different types of aerospace technology, military aircraft, yet to them, they were fascinated enough to say it caught their eye and it was truly bizarre.
So if this isn't anything recognized by local military personnel, could it be extraterrestrial? Turns out, it's not the first time alleged ETs have been reported near a military base. In 1967, guards outside Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana reported seeing a strange red light over the facility. The light appeared to be a hovering oval-shaped craft about 30 to 40 feet in diameter. Then, without explanation, one by one, the nuclear missiles became disarmed. So, was something similar happening over 29 Palms?
I think we have enough of a framework there to say that trained military personnel found this to be a fascinating object. And to me, that would merit further investigation.
Because this video was recorded by a military infrared camera, we can presume it hasn't been doctored. But what is it that we're seeing here? What could be behind those big balls of light? Time to ask our experts to illuminate us. We begin with military aviation expert Tim McMillan.
From first impression, you get the idea that these 5 lights are connected to a single object. This could be some type of triangular craft that has these 5 lights in different points. But I don't see the control surfaces, the wings. It's traveling much too slow. So we can really easily rule out airplane.
We took the video to Rich Hoffman of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. After incidents like those over other bases like Malmstrom, is it possible extraterrestrials really are monitoring our military capabilities? Hoffman doesn't see a match, at least not in this case.
Throughout history, we've had a lot of military bases that have had UFO reports near them. And what we've seen from just all those sheer cases is it's almost on the scale of surveillance. What's curious is these lines that are going up there. These would indicate some sort of trail that's being left behind them, and you don't see that on UFO reports.
Instead of UFOs, McMillan sees a clue, that brings these objects back down to Earth.
Looking at the smoke and vapor trail that's being left behind them, you see that these are actually independent points of light. And they appear to be in a free fall, dependent on gravity. And the fact that these are moving slow like this leads me to believe that what we're looking at here is actually the deployment of illumination flares that are providing light for some type of ground forces coordinated activity.
Illumination flares, they're very, very bright, and they're often, quite often, reported as UFOs.
Our verdict, this isn't a UFO attracted to our military. These are just illumination flares. But keep an eye out for other unexplained objects around military bases, just in case the extraterrestrials are keeping an eye on us. Bolivia is known for its multitude of mountains, its abundance of alpacas, and its cornucopia of coca fields. Well, now we can add aliens to that list. August 2023, a group of hikers are traversing Bolivia's scenic Rio Pilcomayo near the city of Trujillo. One member of the party stops to take some pictures and ends up capturing way more than the breathtaking scenery. It appears these unsuspecting hikers were not alone. Pushing in on the image, we see a thin, nearly translucent figure walking along the riverbank. It seems to be around 4 feet in size, walking in a strange, inhuman gait. Eerily, the creature's dead, hollow stare seems to be directed straight at the photographer. Many internet sleuths believe this photo helps prove the existence of the infamous Greys, the most common type of alleged alien reported by abductees.
What first caught my attention is it definitely looks very humanoid in respect to other aliens that we've seen, like a short gray with a bulbous head or some type of bipedal humanoid entity. And it falls in line with other beings that have been reported under either alien abduction or some type of a scenario where an alien has been seen, usually near some type of a flying craft.
Martel singles out a sighting from 1978 that occurred in this very same region, where many eyewitnesses claim to have seen a cylindrical spacecraft crash into the side of a mountain.
Now, for South America, this was equivalent to a Roswell-type event. Hundreds of witnesses saw this, and even more heard a sonic-like explosion.
Witness reports of this incident claim the impact was so violent, it threw people to the ground and shattered nearby glass windows.
And you have to wonder if events like this speak to why we might be seeing entities like this walking around in this location.
Bolivia is also home to the mysterious ancient ruins of Pumapunku, thought by some to be as many as 17,000 years old. Others believe the intricacy of the stone cutting could be the work of an advanced technology, possibly from another world. Could our photo be connected? Let's see what our experts think. First, could someone in a costume be trying to pull a fast one? Biologist Stephanie Manka doesn't think so.
It doesn't seem like it's an actual person in a costume doing a hoax because the body is too thin, the limbs are too thin to be a person.
However, she isn't convinced that this photo is concrete proof of an extraterrestrial species like the Greys.
Grays are described as grays for a reason because they are the color gray, and this one appears to be translucent, so it doesn't fit with the definition of what people see. According to the accounts that people have said about grays, there's been no mention of light bending or other sort of advanced camouflage used by the grays.
Manka also questions the authenticity of the image.
What I personally think happened is that somebody realized these kind of looked like legs and then doctored the photos and added the top part of it.
To follow up on Manka's doubts, we brought the image to our forensic video analyst, Michael Primo.
So the absence of the shadow of this object in the area that it was captured on the shoreline, as well as the absence in that reflection of the body of water beneath it, is peculiar.
And while believers of this image claim the lack of shadows and reflections could be aspects of some alien cloaking technology, Primo believes this picture has definitely been altered in some way.
So we take a look at the information within the picture, take a deeper dive to try to see if we can detect any evidence of alteration or manipulation. And there's a test that we run called JPEG Ghosts that will show us evidence of recompression. You can see a dip in the compression data. This valley shows that the image has been processed and the quality has been reduced at least one time.
So does that mean it's a fake? Unfortunately, Primo can neither confirm nor deny.
The challenge becomes with this picture, because it's been recompressed, we simply don't know if the area in question on the creature was added or removed. Because this amount of recompression was introduced, it changed all of those pixel regions. It stripped the VIN number from the vehicle before it was painted, so to speak. We can't verify one way or the other, but I have my concerns with this picture.
Our verdict? We're going with suspected hoax. Although there isn't enough technical data to confirm, we agree with our experts that there's definitely something dubious about this photo. But rest assured, if there are aliens wandering the mountains of Bolivia, we'll find them soon enough. Ever since George A. Romero's 1968 classic, The Night of the Living Dead, the world has been obsessed with zombies. They're frightening, kind of fun, and totally fictitious, right? Well, that's what we thought. But could this next video prove that real zombies do, in fact, walk and crawl among us? June 2020, Ignalina, Lithuania. One homeowner is out in their garden enjoying the summer warmth when they notice a few dead insects in the grass. A fairly standard sight, but upon further inspection, things get downright creepy. One of the cockchafer bugs is moving, despite being hollowed out on the inside. Crawling through the grass all on its own with a gaping hole in its abdomen, this bug seems like the walking dead in real life. Field researcher Ken Gerhard wonders if this beetle is among many in the animal kingdom able to cheat death.
So in nature, there are occasionally remarkable instances of animals suffering horrific injuries and then defying all biological laws and living on for a brief period of time. I think the best example of this is something known as self-amputation. An example would be a lizard's tail breaking off. And they're actually able to regenerate these appendages at a later time. We wonder if this relates to this particular film. How is it that this insect has endured such a horrific injury and yet it continues to survive?
Some commenters had another theory in mind.
There's also been speculation that this may be the work of a fungus known as Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, or cordyceps, the fungal neuroinfection that turns the world's population into zombies in the popular show The Last of Us. It's actually a mushroom that releases its spores into different types of insects, and the spores actually grow and replicate inside of the insect, and ultimately they release chemicals into the animal's brain that essentially turn them into zombies. It manipulates their thought process and causes them to climb up into trees to drop more of these spores. It sounds like science fiction, but as we can see in this video, this actually may be a fungus that is capable of taking over and reanimating dead tissue.
This isn't the first time we've taken a look at undead wildlife on this show. Like this fish, seemingly with no head at all, that was filmed swimming through a lake in Bangladesh. While we were able to reach scientific conclusions with those cases, will our experts have the same luck with this zombified critter? Is this beetle exhibiting its ability to cheat death by regenerating its insides? Wildlife biologist Floyd Hayes says to regenerate anything, an animal must first be able to eat the nutrients necessary to grow.
This animal is missing almost all of its internal organs, which means it's not going to be able to digest and process food.
So how on earth is this bug still kicking?
This particular beetle belongs to the genus Melolantha, which is native to Europe, and it is attacked by two different species of fungi of the genus Cordyceps.
Bingo. Hayes says the missing insides are a telltale sign of this fungal invasion.
You get spores that break through the exoskeleton, get into the interior of the insect, and then they digest the internal organs until there's only the exoskeleton and the brain.
But if you think that makes it a zombie, wildlife biologist Stephanie Menke says there's one important distinction.
This fungus is not resurrecting animals from the dead. There is activity still going on in the brain. There are electrical connections going between its limbs. At this point, it doesn't have much longer until it's going to climb a tree, and the fungus will protrude out of it and release its spores to infect other insects.
In other words, it's not dead, just almost dead. But cordyceps can still bend insects to its will. Do humans have anything to worry about?
People naturally wonder, could this happen to humans? It would take a lot of mutations to be able to jump to humans. So it's reasonable to believe that it would take millions of years or more to adapt to do this to human beings.
Part of that reason is the high temperature of the human body, which prevents the fungus from multiplying as it does in insects with their lower body temperatures. For now, fungi, for the most part, are friends.
There's actually benefits to humans taking cordyceps in capsule form, including reducing inflammation, improving heart health, and improving your immunity. So we shouldn't be afraid of fungus just because of this.
Our verdict? This is the work of Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, or the zombie ant fungus. And it's called that for a reason. It has evolved over millions of years to infect the bodies of insects. And it might be just as long before we need to be worried about our own zombies. They say dogs experience the world differently from humans. Their senses of smell and hearing are far better than ours. But a recent video has people wondering if these superpowers go far beyond their noses and ears. On a sweltering July day in 2020, UK residents Meg Oxtoby and Jeff Parlett are on a hike with their trio of Hungarian Vizslas, unaware of what they're about to witness.
We were walking along, just having a chat like we normally do, and then we noticed that the dogs were not moving.
At first, this looks like a photograph, but keep watching. The camera starts moving. And yet the dogs all appear to be frozen in their tracks.
We couldn't believe it. You could see the leaves moving and all the bushes, but the dogs were completely still.
I'm telling you, we are not freezing or slowing down this video. You can tell by the shrubbery right here that it's moving in the wind. Now check out how this dog has his leg raised and tail curled. And this other dog is frozen in mid-step. Look, it seems impossible to maintain balance like that. The three Vizslas stay in that position for 4 whole minutes before resuming their normal dog activity.
We were completely gobsmacked.
And it doesn't end there. Since Meg and Jeff had their canine conundrum, we've come across another story of animals inexplicably freezing. In late November 2023, Brianna Lindsay went out to feed her chickens at her Tampa, Florida home when this happened.
It's grab time! What the fool? What is happening right now?
I was so confused. I was like, there were so many thoughts running in my head. I'm like, why are they freezing? The trees are still moving, so time is still relevant. My mind was just blown. I couldn't move.
The hens remained frozen in place for more than 2 minutes before finally skittering off when Brianna's husband opens the door.
Nick! What the? Oh my God!
After posting that video, I just wanted people to see what I saw. So I'm like, what is this? Is this a glitch in the matrix? And a lot of seasoned chicken owners are like, it's a hawk. And then my husband actually did his own research. He's like, wait a minute, there's a hawk outside?
In this case, experts believe the chickens froze because of a survival mechanism that kicked in after they spotted the hawk. But Vizslas are hunting dogs, the predator, not the prey. So what's up with them? Ancient cultures, from the Greeks to the Romans to Koreans, all have myths about dogs having supernatural abilities. The Mayans believed that dogs, known for being great swimmers, swam the souls of the dead across a shadowy lake to the afterlife. Forensic investigator Chase Klotsky wonders if something like that is at work here.
Are there, like, forces somehow making them stop like that? It seems like a theory is that dogs have a spiritual side almost. They sense things like earthquakes, illness, even death sometimes.
Recent studies have explored whether dogs have some sort of sixth sense to communicate telepathically. Meg and Jeff concur. Their dogs seem to have some kind of canine ESP.
They knew what they were all doing and they knew how long to stay still for. So it's just amazing how they can communicate without actually speaking. So that side of it is kind of magical, really.
Ugh. That was me trying to freeze for just 5 seconds. It's impossible. I'm too twitchy. So forget about 4 whole minutes. It's clear these dogs can do some amazing things, right? But can they really freeze themselves in mid-step? Let's take the video to our experts. Zoologist Roxy Furman considers whether a supernatural force may have terrified the dogs into a form of paralysis.
Dogs definitely do freeze when they're afraid, so there could be something that's made them scared, but there's nothing else in their body language that indicates fear. Their ears are up, their tail's up. Vizslas are hunting dogs, but I don't think that they can be that still for the entire duration of a 4-minute video without kind of any movement. It looks like it's been edited in some way to me.
Compare this other video of hunting Vizslas with Meg and Jeff's. You can see these other dogs don't maintain their posture as well or as long. So maybe Roxy's right. Meg and Jeff's dog video can't be real.
So there are apps that can be downloaded on these mobile devices that can animate certain areas of a picture while preserving other areas frozen in time. Although these apps can deceive a viewer, we found no evidence to support that this file was manipulated or slowed down or frozen in any way.
So, this is, in fact, real. Biology professor Floyd Hayes believes this is just the product of centuries of breeding.
This is a behavior that is selectively bred for in several breeds of dogs, although it is reinforced in dogs by training. In fact, they actually can be trained to lift a paw above the ground when they are pointing.
Hayes may be onto something here. At the end of the video, we do see the dogs unfreeze as soon as a bird flies away. But here's the catch. Meg and Jeff say they have never trained their dogs to behave like this.
We teach them, sit and stay, but this was something on a completely different scale and something that I can't see being taught to them whatsoever.
Our verdict? This is still an animal anomaly. These 3 Vizslas really did freeze in place for 4 minutes. And if Meg and Jeff truly didn't train them to do this, how they stopped time is still a doggone mystery. We often analyze videos that at first look like one thing, then turn out to be something different. In this next story, the closer you look, the creepier and crawlier it gets. March 2021, Tautapao, Thailand. A person is walking along when they stumble upon a cryptic site and pull out their phone. No, someone didn't just drop a designer chain necklace. This formation appears to be made up of hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny worms. They've formed a large braided circle out of their own bodies, and they're in constant movement, crawling steadily in a clockwise direction. Science fiction writer Benjamin Percy witnessed a similar formation while walking his dog near his home in Minnesota.
I'd never seen anything like it. It at first appeared to be a snake about the size of my arm, and then I begin to think it's something otherworldly. They appeared to be these sort of translucent worms that had a kind of wave-like motion. It had this kind of hypnotic surging effect.
Journalist Erin McCarthy believes this slithering, slimy circle calls to mind an important mythical creature.
For me, this brings to mind the Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, which symbolizes the endless cycle of death and rebirth.
So, give us some rope here. Could this living ring be signaling something similar to that tail-eating snake?
Throughout the animal kingdom, there are examples of creatures sensing things that are about to occur well before humans are even aware that anything is happening. The widespread occurrence of animals traveling in circles like this has led some to theorize that maybe the end of the world is coming.
What can worms teach us about the circle of life and death? Well, perhaps quite a bit. Take the planarian flatworm, which has unlocked the secret of regeneration. If you cut off its head, it grows a new one. Simultaneously, its severed head grows a new tail. But are these worms regenerating anything within their circle? Let's ask the experts. Wildlife biologist Dr. Stephanie Manka says it's not uncommon for smaller creatures to form something called superorganisms. Take ants, for example.
Some ants will form in times of flooding a raft by entangling their bodies together so that they can all survive together.
And ants aren't the only ones to exhibit this type of behavior. Aquatic salps are another example.
Saps are a group of tunicates which are closely related to vertebrates, and they often form colonies, smaller individuals link into a chain, and that way they're able to stay afloat in the water more easily rather than sinking to the bottom.
Hayes thinks that's what these worms are actually up to.
So there are two potential advantages for them traveling together in a group. One of them is they look like a larger organism like a snake, which can help deter predators. Another one is they're laying down a path of slime on the ground and on each other, and they could travel on that slime more easily than if each one is traveling alone in a dry environment.
But then why this ring-shaped formation? Manka says there may be a connection between what we're seeing here and what's known as an ant death spiral.
Ants have trails that leave pheromones, so they end up creating a trail that has a circle. They keep following the pheromones, which reinforces the circle even more, and it leads to a death spiral because they don't ever leave the trails and they just end up starving.
But as Hayes looks closer, another clue emerges. These worms might not even be worms.
Although these look like worms, they're actually the larvae of fungus gnats. And when they're ready to pupate, they travel in a group to a suitable location.
That's likely what we saw with Benjamin's worm serpent. But with the circle, our experts say these creatures have basically created a real-life Ouroboros, the tail-swallowing snake.
What happened here is probably the lead larvae, in making a turn, saw the larvae from the back and thought that they needed to catch up, and then that created the circle because they're programmed to follow each other.
The individuals think they're going somewhere when in fact they're going nowhere. Eventually they become exhausted and they die. They don't know better to take off in a different direction.
Our verdict, these are fungus gnat larvae. And like Ouroboros, they also represent the circle of life and death. In this case, their own. Finally tonight, throughout history, all kinds of strange things have fallen from the sky. Dead birds, fish, even frogs. But what about alien slime? You never know what you'll find when you start poking around. It's October 2014 near Romney, West Virginia. Diane Wingett is checking the blueberry and raspberry patches at her weekend property when she sees something strange and alerts her husband, Randy.
There's some kind of jelly fungus here at the base of our raspberry bushes. It's just really weird. It looks like crystals, but it's soft jelly.
Diane points out a large pile of what appear to be gelatinous and translucent small blobs.
I suppose that's a rare delicacy. Someone's going to come here.
It's not caviar. Not fish eggs, but it's cold.
Randy and Diane say they have no idea what the strange substance is or how it got there. When they come back to the property the following week, the substance has vanished.
It seemed obvious it must have come from the sky. The way that it landed and the position it was in.
We experienced a lot of flyovers by military and commercial flights, so we thought, well, maybe that was it. Maybe it was something from
plane.
From an airplane.
The couple posts the video online seeking answers, and a few years later, they receive a note that changes everything.
We got a letter in the mail from a lady in Yakima, and she explained to us what it was. She said it's been around for centuries. It's called star jelly.
Star jelly, a mystical substance long rumored to come straight from the stars.
According to folklore, star jelly are actually pieces of celestial bodies, whether they be meteors or nebula, that have come apart and fallen to Earth. It typically disappears not long after it's been deposited.
McCarthy says star jelly stories date back hundreds of years.
In the 14th century, medieval physician John of Gaddesden actually mentioned star jelly in his medical writings.
And this is not the only odd thing that's said to have fallen from the sky. In a previous story, we told you about birds dropping down from above in Chihuahua, Mexico. And tales of plagues of frogs sent from heaven by God go all the way back to biblical times. And even though people have claimed since the Middle Ages that star jelly appears after meteor showers, McCarthy says some other ideas about its origin are more down to earth.
Some have said that maybe this is a fungi that we're looking at, or maybe it's the anal secretion of an animal, or maybe it's unfertilized frog spawn that have been eaten and then regurgitated by a predator.
We've told you before about one famous case of star jelly from 1994 where gelatinous rain fell in Oakville, Washington. People nearby complained of flu-like symptoms, and several pets that encountered the goo even died. Lab work couldn't identify the substance, but maybe our experts will have better luck this time. This clearly doesn't look like the remains of a fallen bird, fish, or frog. But could it be their spawn? This is quite a big pile, but some species of frogs can lay up to 30,000 eggs at a time. Could that be the answer?
It has a lot of qualities similar to frog eggs. Like, it looks gelatinous or jello-like. And when you look in it, you can see like little specks too. And frog eggs have a center area that's darker. What throws me off is that it's kind of jagged. Frog eggs are more circular in shape. And it's not in a pond or a wetland area. It's in somebody's yard, and this area seems dry.
Then perhaps this is a more primordial form of life, known as slime mold. These unusual organisms defy all attempts at categorization.
They're not fungus, not plants, not animals. It depends on the species, but they can look like lots of different things. They can look similar to fungus. They can look similar to like algae. They can aggregate into larger groups, but they still look quite different than what we're seeing in this picture.
So maybe this substance does actually come from the star.
Meteors are a chunk of rock that are coming towards the Earth. Something like this would not stand a chance making it through the atmosphere. And think of stars, think of the sun, extreme sources of energy. This is jelly on the ground. It's not releasing energy, it's just a gelatinous substance.
Then what could this gross goo possibly be? Hernandez says there's another hypothesis based on a similar substance discovered in 2012 in Dorset, England.
The explanation to that was it was a sodium polyacrylate that was used for agricultural purposes. Given that it is an extreme absorbent of water, it's able to retain that water for crops to be able to grow.
Diane tells us that a few months before finding this substance, she put some polymer crystals in the yard to help with water retention. But she doubts that's what this is.
When that got wet, it was round, not cubed. So I knew it wasn't what I put in the ground.
The first time the hikers heard that something strange lurked in the Mojave, they laughed about it, the way people do when rumor runs into disbelief under the scorching sun. But laughter has a way of fading when the desert wind carries the strange into the realm of the impossible and the mind begins to itch with questions no one thought to ask. And so it began for us, for friends from different corners of life, stranded not by accident but by the curious pull of something unseen, a mystery that drew us deeper than any GPS signal, deeper than logic, deeper than fear itself. I remember the morning before everything changed, the way the horizon blurred with heat mirages shimmering over cracked earth and brittle brush, casting illusions that danced like phantoms between reality and dreams. We loaded our packs with water, extra boots, climbing ropes, and food more than enough to last a week, because that was the plan. 7 days of peace away from cell phones and city lights, 7 days to reconnect with the world we had each left behind, ignorant of the way the desert would reconnect us with something ancient and unknowable. My name is Iris Maddox, and I should have known better than to romanticize the Mojave, to write it off as nothing more than a picturesque backdrop for Instagram posts and campfire songs. For the way the sunrise bleeds orange and violet into the cold blue sky before the heat settles on your neck like the breath of a god. But instead the desert had its own plan, and it whispered secrets that would unravel our minds long before any tangible encounter altered the course of our lives. We met in the dusty little parking lot by Kelso Dunes, the wind tugging at flaps of our tents and the desert sun already high enough to promise another day of suffocating warmth. My friend Malik, with his easy grin and weathered hat, was the first to spot the odd footprints. 3 toes, elongated and strange, heading toward what seemed like a dried wash, and though at first we joked that it must be some desert critter no one had seen before, that laughter dissolved when the tracks strangely vanished as abruptly as they had appeared, like an unanswered question on a lecture hall chalkboard, a riddle half-whispered in the dark. The tracks had no claws, yet they were deep enough to indicate something weighing more than any coyote or mountain lion could muster, and the spacing between them suggested a gait that was unsettlingly human yet warped, almost as though whoever or whatever made them was walking just slightly off rhythm with gravity itself. And that is when a cold shiver traced the length of my spine, because I realized we were no longer simply hikers in the desert, but participants in an unfolding event that the rational mind could not fully grasp but the senses could undeniably feel. Our group was an odd mix of personalities. Malik with his grounded confidence, Fiona whose sharp eyes missed nothing and already had photographs of the tracks on her camera, Jonas who carried a well-worn science journal and muttered excited hypotheses about cryptozoology, and me, trying desperately to balance skepticism with wonder. But whatever our differences, the atmosphere among us shifted from casual exploration to tense alert in the space of a heartbeat. We followed the footprints westward, the desert stretching like a vast ocean of bleached sand and jagged rocks, silent but for the whisper of wind and the occasional snap of brittle branches underfoot. And as we moved deeper into the dunes, the sky seemed to grow more intense, a brutal blue so frighteningly perfect it felt like a prelude to revelation. Hours passed with no sight of water, no trace of shade, and no sign of anything living except ourselves, but the prints reappeared, interrupted now by odd scars on the ground. Grooves carved into the earth as though something had dragged itself forward one imperceptibly slow inch at a time, and I remember feeling a strange mix of revulsion and awe, as though we were walking alongside an unsung chapter of history, a story that demanded to be seen even if it threatened to consume us. By midday the heat became a translucent veil, warping the dunes into wavering hills that seemed to breathe, and clouds of shimmering dust swirled around our ankles like phantoms leading the way. Our water grew alarmingly low, but none of us spoke of retreat, for a force heavier than fear bound us forward, tethering our ragged footsteps to the mystery that beckoned like a pulse beneath the desert skin. The tracks led to what looked like an abandoned wash, cracked, dry, starved of life, and there, half buried in eons of rust-colored sand, we noticed something distinctly out of place. A metallic glint, a surface too smooth and curved to belong to any rock or mineral, polished in a way that defied the coarse brutality of the desert. Fiona's breath caught as she brushed away sand with gloved hands, revealing more of the object beneath. And when the sun struck it, she swore she saw colors that shouldn't exist in nature, hues that danced between iridescent blues and greens with flashes of a warmth that felt almost alive. Jonas steadied himself against a rock, his journal forgotten, eyes wide with something like rapture, while Malik reached out, fingertips trembling, to touch the surface, and the moment he did the ground under our feet seemed to hum. Not audibly, but in that deep visceral way that resonates in the bone and the blood. I still remember the exact shape of the object as it emerged from the earth. A pod-like chamber, sleek and elliptical, no more than a few meters long, its surface etched with sinuous lines that hinted at a construction far beyond human technology. We stood in silence, air thick with astonishment and a creeping realization that we had stumbled upon something no one in recorded history could explain. And then, as though responding to our collective breath, the surface of the pod shifted. A subtle movement, like the slow blink of a colossal machine waking from eons of slumber. and a seam glowed with a light so soft it felt like the memory of dawn. We froze, hearts pounding, because instinctively we knew this was not mere wreckage or refuse, but a crafted vessel of unknown origin, perhaps an emissary of what our ancestors had whispered about around campfires. The eternal question of extraterrestrial life. The wind dropped almost instantly, as if the desert itself paused to witness what would come next. Fiona, always the brave one despite her petite frame, took a hesitant step closer, the only sound her shallow breaths and the distant echo of her camera shutter capturing every tremor of the moment. The pod pulsed again, a rhythmic beat that seemed in sync with the thrum of our own hearts, and then a section of its hull slid open with no sound at all, like glass parting on a silent breath, revealing an interior lit with a gentle luminescence that defied the blinding sunlight outside. We shielded our eyes, squinting against the glow, and that was when we saw it. Something that shouldn't exist outside the realm of dreams or nightmares. A figure, slight and graceful, limbs elongated in a way that whispered of otherworldly evolution, skin shimmering with a pearlescent sheen, eyes vast and deep like soulless pools reflecting starlight undimmed by distance, regarded us with an intensity that unsettled the senses. It stood upright, but the symmetry of its form was unlike any creature we had seen, a harmonized geometry that suggested intelligence beyond our comprehension, and though it made no sound, we felt a wave of communication in our minds. Subtle, unspoken words that washed over us like a tide. Do not fear, it came not as speech but as sensation, a cascade of meaning that settled in the space between thought and feeling. Yet fear became our first, clumsy companion, because the unknown is often mistaken for danger until proven otherwise. Jonas swayed, gripping his journal as though it were a lifeline, and Malik took a step forward, his voice stranded somewhere between curiosity and command, wanting to greet this being, to ask questions no human had dared to ask before. I felt Fiona's hand graze mine, her fingers trembling so hard I thought she might collapse, but her eyes burned with that spark of wonder, the same spark that had once driven explorers to cross oceans and scale peaks. The alien, if we can call it that, seemed to study us with an expression not of hostility but of measured interest, and then it extended a slender limb toward a floating orb of light within its chamber, a sphere that pulsed with soft warmth, like a heartbeat forged from pure spectral energy. I remember every detail of that moment, the way the sunlight fractured on the orb, the way the wind returned to whisper in the dunes, the way our shadows trembled against the jagged terrain. And then, in the blink of an eye that felt stretched like eternity, the orb lifted into the air, gliding toward us as though drawn by something deep in our souls. That single action shattered the fragile cocoon of silence, and suddenly our minds hummed with questions, unformed and tangled. Yet somehow the alien grasped them all without the need for words. You are seekers, it conveyed with waves of thought that merged with our consciousness, more profound than any language known to humankind. You have come to a place forgotten by time, where the echoes of stars live in silence. And even as its message resonated within us, we felt a subtle shift, a ripple in the air as the orb's radiance washed over our faces, bathing us in a warmth that felt like memory itself, like something we had always known but never remembered. Then the being reached out again, drawing our attention beyond the dunes to a distant horizon where something ancient glimmered, a skyline that pulsed with light unlike anything earthly, and I knew, in that single breathless instant, that the Mojave had become far more than a backdrop for weary travelers. It had become a threshold to a truth that would rewrite every notion of existence we had ever held dear. The horizon shimmered with heat, but the strange glow we had glimpsed from the pod seemed to pulse in time with our racing hearts, each beat carrying a weight of anticipation and fear, and though none of us spoke, the air was thick with unspoken questions, the kind that press against the chest until words spill over in stammered attempts at understanding. We followed the alien's silent guidance, the orb hovering just ahead, illuminating a narrow path carved into the jagged terrain like a trail of light left by some divine hand, and with each step the desert seemed less like a barren wasteland and more like a vast cathedral, its walls of rock etched with shadows that danced in rhythms that matched the alien pulse, a rhythm that resonated in our bones and whispered secrets we weren't yet ready to fully comprehend. Malik led the way, his normally confident stride faltering as the air seemed to thicken, and Fiona trailed close behind, camera forgotten in favor of gripping my sleeve as if the touch alone could anchor her to reality, while Jonas scribbled furiously in his journal, his pen moving faster than thought, documenting impressions that might one day seem absurd but felt urgent in the present, a testament to the moment we were living that we could not yet articulate. The dunes shifted beneath our feet, and I noticed the sand itself glimmered faintly, almost as if the very grains carried traces of light from the orb, refracting in subtle blues and greens that made it impossible to determine where the desert ended and the apparition began. A visual symphony that challenged the eyes and scrambled the mind, forcing us into a heightened state of awareness where every sound, every shimmer, every movement could be a clue or a warning. As we pressed forward, the landscape transformed. Flat expanses gave way to rocky outcrops that jutted upward like the spines of some prehistoric beast, casting long, distorted shadows across the sand, and the orb moved with deliberate intent, halting now and then as if to ensure we were keeping pace, or perhaps to teach us patience, a lesson unfamiliar to minds accustomed to the instant gratification of technology and urban life. I noticed that the alien itself did not walk in a conventional sense. It hovered slightly above the ground, its elongated limbs barely touching the sand, and with each movement it emitted a subtle, shimmering sound, like wind over glass, so delicate that we could almost imagine it was a hallucination, except for the undeniable weight of presence it carried, the way it altered the very molecules around it, causing the air to tingle, our skin to prickle, as though the desert itself was aware of this visitor and bending subtly to accommodate its passage. We followed the orb and the alien deeper into the desert's heart, past rock formations that resembled faces frozen in silent screams, past washes that seemed to yawn like gaping maws, and with every step, the sense of reality loosened, stretched thin by the presence of something utterly incomprehensible yet intimately intimate, as if the being could peer into our very consciousness and pluck out our most hidden fears and desires. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in. Our water had dwindled, our muscles burned from the ceaseless climb, and the sun scorched our shoulders with an intensity that felt almost unnatural, but neither hunger nor pain could pull us from the path the alien had set before us. Jonas paused to catch his breath, journal in hand, muttering about energy readings, electromagnetic anomalies, and gravitational shifts, while Malik leaned against a rock, wiping sweat from his brow, both of them visibly shaken by the inexplicable phenomena surrounding us. Fiona, ever the observer, whispered that she could feel a pattern in the way the light pulsed, a rhythm underlying the apparent chaos, a language of sorts written in energy and movement rather than words, and for the first time I wondered if what we were witnessing was not just contact with another species, but a communion with an intelligence so profoundly alien that our primitive senses could only perceive fragments, mere shadows of understanding. I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon, the alien's silhouette framed against the glowing sky, marveling at the grace with which it moved, the impossible geometry of its form, and the way it seemed entirely aware of our limits, gently guiding without coercion, challenging without cruelty, teaching without words, a mentor in the language of wonder and awe. As twilight approached, the orb began to descend slowly, settling on a plateau that overlooked a basin of jagged rocks and glowing mineral deposits, the colors so vivid that they seemed almost painted, yet more real than reality itself. We climbed the final incline with trembling limbs, anticipation and fear coiled together in our chests, and when we reached the top, the scene that unfolded before us erased every notion of familiarity. The basin shimmered with an unearthly light, the rocks emitting soft glows that pulsed in harmony with the orb, forming patterns that might have been interpreted as celestial maps, constellations etched in stone rather than sky, a cosmic diagram of something we could not yet name but felt viscerally in our very bones. The alien hovered above the center of the basin, the orb floating before it, spinning slowly, casting arcs of illumination across the landscape, and then, without warning, the being extended multiple limbs simultaneously, tracing lines through the air as if drawing symbols that resonated with the ground below. The energy of the act so palpable that it sent shivers racing down our spines and hair standing on end. Jonas fell to his knees, muttering excitedly about signs of advanced intelligence, the possibility of communication through light and energy rather than sound, while Malik and Fiona simply stared, mouths agape, absorbing the enormity of what was happening. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but no words existed in my throat. only the awareness that we were witnessing something monumental, a revelation that demanded patience and humility in equal measure. Then the orb lifted higher, spinning faster, and the air vibrated with a frequency we could feel in our chest cavities, a resonance that seemed to synchronize with our own heartbeats, coaxing us into a heightened state of awareness where thought and sensation were inseparable. And the alien reached toward the orb, its elongated fingers brushing the surface without contact, and the sphere responded with a burst of radiant energy that expanded outward in waves, illuminating the entire basin in a spectrum of colors that no human mind could name. In that instant, we felt memories that were not our own, visions of distant worlds and civilizations, a history of life and energy stretching across eons, the rise and fall of stars, the birth of planets, the dance of molecules and consciousness, and through it all, a singular intelligence observing, guiding, and perhaps testing, ensuring that we could bear witness without succumbing to terror. Fiona gasped, pressing her hands over her ears despite the absence of sound, tears streaming down her face, while Malik's stoic demeanor shattered, replaced by a childlike awe that left him silent and trembling. Jonas, ever the analyst, scribbled frantically, capturing impressions that would never fully translate onto paper, a futile attempt to codify the sublime, while I simply watched, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of comprehension being forced upon our limited human perspective. Night fell, though it did not bring darkness in the traditional sense. The basin remained aglow, a soft, constant luminescence bathing us in light that felt like liquid warmth. The alien retreated slightly, hovering above the orb, its presence no less imposing but somehow more serene. And then, for the first time, we felt what could only be described as invitation. A subtle pull toward the center of the basin, toward a place where energy, matter, and consciousness intertwined in ways that defied physics yet felt undeniably true. Malik took a hesitant step forward, then another, and soon all of us were drawn into the illuminated heart, the orb guiding our path with a gentle pulse, and I realized we had crossed a threshold not just of geography but of perception, where human limitations dissolved in the face of something profoundly intelligent and beautiful, a communion that required nothing but presence and openness, a lesson in humility and wonder that words could never capture. The alien observed our movements, occasionally extending limbs to gesture, its body language conveying reassurance, instruction, and a subtle form of encouragement that we understood intuitively, a language older than spoken words, forged in the resonance of energy, consciousness, and attention. Hours, or perhaps minutes, for time no longer adhered to its usual rules, passed with us exploring this luminous basin under the alien's guidance. The orb responded to our curiosity, shifting in response to our gestures, amplifying when our focus deepened, revealing subtle patterns in the mineral formations, flows of energy that resembled rivers of light, intricate weavings that seemed to encode vast amounts of information in forms that were simultaneously visible and intangible. Jonas attempted to record frequencies, wavelengths, and patterns, but even his scientific mind faltered, overwhelmed by the complexity and elegance of the system, while Malik and Fiona simply walked in awe, absorbing, feeling, and responding to the environment with intuitive gestures that seemed to interact with the orb, eliciting responses that reinforced the alien's silent teaching. I followed cautiously, aware of the alien's gaze upon us, feeling an unspoken message that it was assessing, evaluating, and perhaps even nurturing the growth of our awareness. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to confront true otherness, not with fear but with reverence, a recognition that the universe was infinitely stranger, deeper, and more alive than we could have ever imagined. The desert night embraced us with a light that was not moonlight nor starlight, but something between, illuminating every grain of sand and ridge of rock, while the alien remained a sentinel, guiding us gently through patterns of luminous formations and teaching us through subtle resonance and light. Each pulse from the orb seemed to communicate more than language ever could, conveying the rhythms of life, the interconnectedness of all things, and the quiet promise that understanding was possible if we listened with more than our ears. And yet, beneath this wonder, a tension lingered, questions of purpose, consequence, and the fragile line between contact and intrusion haunted our thoughts, for we knew that we were guests in a domain far older, wiser, and more complex than humanity, and the choices we made in the hours to come could alter not just our lives, but the way we perceived reality itself. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the basin, alive with unseen currents of energy, and we realized, with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that the journey was only beginning, that each step, each gesture, each thought would ripple through the space around us in ways we could not predict, and that the alien's presence was both an invitation and a challenge, demanding our full attention, humility, and courage. And so we waited, hearts pounding, minds open, senses alive, as the alien hovered silently, the orb between us like a beacon of knowledge and wonder, and the Mojave night sang softly with unseen harmonies, a lullaby older than the stars themselves. Morning arrived in the Mojave not with the usual harsh glare but with a gentle illumination that seemed to seep from the ground itself, bathing the dunes and jagged rocks in soft, iridescent hues, and though the sun had risen in the sky, its light felt subordinate to the lingering glow of the orb and the alien, as if the desert had adopted a new clock, one measured in resonance and awareness rather than hours and minutes. We awoke, not fully rested but not entirely fatigued either, caught between the physiological need for sleep and the cognitive pull of revelation, and the first act of consciousness that reached our minds was the realization that nothing about yesterday had been a hallucination, a dream, or an accident, but a tangible encounter that had reshaped the boundary between reality and the unimaginable. I rubbed my eyes, the cool sand beneath my palms grounding me, and glanced at Malik, who sat cross-legged, staring intently at the orb as it hovered above a fissure in the rocky basin floor, its light pulsing gently in a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the desert itself. And for a moment I wondered if the being had chosen us because of something intrinsic to our minds, something that allowed perception of patterns invisible to ordinary human consciousness, or if chance had simply cast us as witnesses to an event for which there were no words. Fiona stirred, her camera finally in hand again, though she did not photograph with the intent to capture evidence but rather to record experience, to externalize the surreal in a way her mind could process, and Jonas muttered softly in his journal about quantifiable energy signatures, gravitational anomalies, and the possibility that what we were observing was a system of communication built not on language but on pure physics, on resonant energy, on the interface between perception and reality. And as I watched him scribble furiously, I realized that even the most analytical among us was beginning to grasp that traditional understanding was inadequate, insufficient to contain the magnitude of what had chosen to reveal itself here. The alien hovered with fluid grace, its elongated limbs shifting with subtlety, fingers tracing lines in the air that seemed to draw connections between the glowing minerals and the orb, forming ephemeral maps or symbols that dissolved before comprehension but left an imprint on our senses. A sense of direction and purpose without instruction. A teaching without the limitations of grammar or vocabulary, and I felt a strange clarity, a certainty that every step we took, every gesture we made, had meaning beyond immediate comprehension. We followed the alien to the center of the basin, where the glow intensified and shadows melted into patterns that danced across the rocks in waves of color, and as we approached, the air itself seemed to vibrate, carrying not sound but sensation, a low, resonant hum that penetrated bone and tissue and made our nerves tingle with anticipation. The orb hovered a mere arm's length from the alien, spinning gently, and then it divided, splitting into 3 smaller spheres that each floated toward us, pulsing independently yet harmonizing with the central orb, as though teaching us the principles of interaction, of symmetry, of energy exchange. Malik reached out instinctively toward one, and when his fingertips brushed the energy, a cascade of imagery washed over him, visions of vast cities built from light, rivers that flowed not with water but with energy, beings whose forms defied geometry yet exuded life in every curve and line, and he staggered backward, eyes wide, mouth opening to release sounds that were almost screams but contained wonder and recognition as well. Fiona gasped, stepping closer, and as her hand hovered near another orb, she felt the same wash of experience, though the content was uniquely tailored, visions filtered through the alien's subtle calibration, suggesting knowledge and empathy of a sophistication that humans could barely imagine. Jonas, ever the meticulous recorder, hesitated, fascinated but cautious, studying the patterns and timing of the energy pulses, and I realized that the alien was not simply showing us its technology or its world but was imparting understanding in a way that challenged the very notion of cognition, teaching through immersion, requiring attention, intuition, and emotional resonance simultaneously. The experience continued for what felt like hours, Yet I sensed that time had no dominion here. Minutes stretched and contracted like living entities, guided by the rhythm of the orb and the alien's movement, and as we absorbed each new wave of perception, I began to notice subtle shifts in the desert itself. The sand now glimmered with microscopic sparks, forming temporary constellations underfoot. Rocks emitted soft pulses as though communicating with the orb, and shadows elongated and retracted in ways that defied solar mechanics, suggesting a harmony of energy fields that linked every element in the basin. We moved carefully, guided by the alien's gestures, learning through observation and interaction, discovering that even our presence altered the patterns in delicate ways, that our thoughts and emotions influenced the luminescence and resonance, and I felt an intimate connection not just to the being and its orb, but to the desert as a living, intelligent environment, a system of consciousness older and vaster than any ecosystem known to human science. The initial fear that had accompanied our first encounter faded, replaced by a deep awe and responsibility, an understanding that we were not intruders but participants, and that our perceptions, actions, and intentions were threads in a tapestry far beyond our previous comprehension. As the day progressed, the alien introduced new variables, subtle shifts in the energy patterns that invited interaction, and we found ourselves compelled to respond in ways that were instinctive rather than deliberate, mirroring the pulses with gestures, with breaths, with synchronized movements that seemed to produce feedback in the light and resonance. Each small success, matching a pulse, predicting a change, recognizing a pattern, was rewarded with bursts of illumination, waves of warmth, or subtle changes in the orb's rotation, teaching us the principles of this new form of communication without ever articulating a single word. Fiona, usually quiet in moments of reflection, began to hum, a low tone that seemed to resonate with the energy of the orbs, and the alien responded by intensifying the glow around her, a harmonic interplay that felt like approval or encouragement, while Malik and Jonas followed suit, producing their own gestures and sounds, learning to manipulate, to interact, and to co-create patterns that extended beyond human comprehension but were immediately intelligible within the framework the alien had provided. I realized that this was not a simple teaching but an initiation, a gradual immersion into an understanding of existence that transcended conventional notions of time, matter, and consciousness, and I felt both exhilaration and trepidation, aware that every misstep could disrupt the delicate balance, yet equally aware that our engagement was essential for comprehension. Night fell again, but it was unlike any night we had known. The basin remained bathed in a soft, continuous glow, the orb's pulses now resembling a heartbeat that linked all of us in a shared rhythm, and I became aware of the subtle changes in myself, the sharpening of perception, the deepening of empathy, the sense that thought and feeling were merging into a cohesive awareness capable of interacting with the alien's energy field. We communicated with each other in glances, gestures, and intuition rather than speech, and the alien's presence was always nearby, a silent guide, patient, observing, allowing us freedom to explore while providing gentle correction when necessary, a teacher whose methods were beyond words yet profoundly effective. Jonas, in particular, seemed transformed, his analytical mind now integrated emotional resonance, his notes capturing not only empirical observation but also patterns of connection and response, producing a record that was simultaneously scientific and poetic, a document that could never be fully understood by anyone not present in that luminous basin. Malik and Fiona moved with a grace that mirrored the alien's gestures, instinctively harmonizing with the pulses of energy, their movements blending human fluidity with an alien rhythm, while I found myself alternately exhilarated and terrified by the depth of understanding being impressed upon our consciousness. At some point, I lost track of linear time entirely. Hours and minutes ceased to have meaning as the orb spun, divided, and reformed, as the alien traced patterns in the air, creating temporary constellations of light and energy that seemed to encode narratives of evolution, cosmology, and intelligence across the universe. I understood that we were witnesses not merely to a demonstration of technology or biology, but to a transmission of knowledge, an attempt to convey the principles of consciousness and interconnectivity across species and worlds. The alien's gestures, combined with the orb's modulation, presented challenges that required intuitive leaps, perceptual alignment, and emotional honesty, and each success deepened our connection. Each error provided subtle correction, all delivered without words yet understood through the resonance of presence and attention. I felt my mind expand, reaching for concepts previously inaccessible, while simultaneously recognizing the fragility of our comprehension, the risk of arrogance or misinterpretation in a system far older and more sophisticated than humanity's limited cognition. And then, just as I began to feel an almost unbearable intimacy with the alien's presence, a subtle tension arose in the basin. The air thickened, the glow flickered, and the orb shifted erratically, creating a staccato rhythm that vibrated through the ground, through our bodies, through our minds. The alien's gestures became sharper, more deliberate, conveying urgency and focus, and for the first time we understood that the exercise had a boundary, a constraint, a reality beyond our comfort, beyond the safe immersion of observation. A warning, subtle but unmistakable, indicated that while the experience was generous, it was not without rules, and that engagement demanded discipline and respect. The realization brought a renewed intensity, compelling us to synchronize more precisely with the pulses, to align our attention with the orb's oscillations, to internalize patterns that now seemed almost sentient, and in doing so, we experienced an unprecedented cohesion, not just among ourselves but with the alien and the desert itself, as though a network of consciousness spanned the entire luminous basin. The air felt charged with possibility, the night alive with colors and pulses, and we realized that we were moving from simple observation to participation, from passive reception to active engagement, a transition both exhilarating and intimidating, a threshold we had crossed willingly yet with trepidation, aware that our responses had meaning, that the alien's presence was not merely a spectacle but a test, a lesson, a communion, and that the Mojave, once barren, was now alive with intelligence and purpose far beyond human reckoning. And as the orb continued to pulse in time with our combined heartbeat, I understood that this was only the beginning, that the path ahead held greater revelations, challenges, and transformations, and that every choice, every gesture, every thought would echo through the luminous desert, shaping not only our understanding but the very nature of our connection to a cosmos we had barely begun to fathom. The following morning, a strange clarity settled over the basin, a sense that the desert itself had exhaled and welcomed us into a rhythm older than memory, and though the sky was pale with dawn, the luminous glow of the orb persisted, pulsing gently like a heartbeat that synchronized with our own, coaxing our senses into heightened perception. We rose cautiously, aware that our bodies still bore the fatigue of prior engagement, yet our minds felt stretched, expanded, as if the alien's presence had subtly rewired neural pathways, opening channels of perception we had never thought possible. Malik was the first to move, stepping lightly over the glittering sand, and as he approached the central orb, it divided once more, spinning in a delicate helix that reflected across the basin walls in cascading arcs of color. And I felt a deep vibration within my chest, a resonance that seemed to encode not only information but emotion, teaching us simultaneously about pattern recognition and the feeling of universal interconnectedness. Fiona followed, her hands trembling yet precise, responding instinctively to the orb's subtle pulses, mirroring the undulating motions of the alien's limbs, and I noticed that her breaths aligned perfectly with the rhythm of light, a silent dance that the being seemed to encourage, rewarding the accuracy of alignment with intensified illumination and warmth that spread from the core of the orb outward, touching us physically and mentally in ways that words could never describe. Jonas, journal open and pen poised, paused momentarily, studying not just the patterns but the shifts in our own reactions, hypothesizing that the aliens' methods were a combination of energy modulation, consciousness resonance, and an advanced form of telepathy that interfaced directly with our sensory and cognitive systems, and I felt the weight of his observations, the bridge between rigorous science and raw experience, and realized that our understanding was fragmentary yet evolving with every pulse, every gesture, every subtle interaction. The alien observed silently, hovering slightly above the orb, its elongated limbs tracing arcs that created temporary constellations in the air, lines of energy that danced before fading into the desert's ethereal glow. And though it never spoke aloud, the sense of communication was undeniable, carried through sensation, intuition, and the deep resonance of shared consciousness. I felt my mind stretch to comprehend not just the geometry of movement, but the principles behind it: balance, energy conservation, feedback, empathy, and a form of intelligence that existed simultaneously in material and immaterial realms, a symphony of awareness that spanned not only space but the very essence of perception itself. As the day progressed, the aliens' teachings became more intricate, demanding not only observation but coordination among us, and we found ourselves moving as a unit, responding to the orb and each other in ways that felt preternaturally synchronized, as though the desert had tuned our individual pulses into a single resonance. Malik led gestures with confidence born of immersion, Fiona's subtle adjustments honed by intuition, Jonas translating sensory feedback into patterns on paper, and I attempted to mirror and integrate, to find a balance between interpretation and instinct, aware that any discord could ripple through the delicate system we were participating in. The orb shifted and multiplied, creating a lattice of floating spheres that pulsed independently yet harmonized with the central source, forming a multidimensional web of energy, movement, and meaning, and each interaction elicited feedback that sharpened our attention, deepened our understanding, and challenged us to perceive not just visual patterns but the hidden architecture of energy flow, the rhythm of existence itself expressed in waves of light and resonance. By mid-afternoon, the desert had fully awakened in response to the aliens' presence. The sands sparkled with microscopic light that shifted in response to our movements. Rocks emitted subtle tones and vibrations, and shadows curled and extended in patterns that suggested an intelligence interacting with our presence. I became acutely aware that every thought, every emotional fluctuation, every hesitation or impulse sent ripples across this luminous field, altering the interplay of light and resonance in ways both obvious and imperceptible. And I realized that our participation was as much about alignment with the environment as with the alien. Fiona's gestures now influenced multiple spheres simultaneously, creating cascading reactions that formed temporary constellations across the basin, while Malik and Jonas responded in tandem, producing harmonic feedback loops that intensified the orb's glow, and I felt a profound sense of unity, not just among ourselves but with the alien and the living desert, a network of consciousness in which observer and observed, teacher and student were inseparably linked. As shadows lengthened and the sky deepened toward twilight, the alien introduced what felt like a new layer of complexity. Sequences that required predictive interaction, a subtle combination of memory, intuition, and alignment with energy patterns that demanded complete presence. Jonas hesitated at first, overanalyzing, but the alien's gentle modulation encouraged fluid response rather than deliberation, and soon we were moving as one, anticipating shifts in pulse and light, creating spirals, arcs, and cascading sequences that resonated with the basin itself, sending vibrations that tingled in our skin, our muscles, even our minds. Malik laughed softly, the sound harmonizing with the alien's energy, a moment of pure joy that spread to Fiona and me, breaking the last remnants of fear or doubt, reinforcing the idea that participation in this system required emotional authenticity as much as cognitive acuity. The desert responded, subtle ripples across the sand, sparkling illumination along rock edges, even a faint hum in the air, as if the entire environment had become a conductor for the symphony of light, energy, and consciousness we were now orchestrating under the alien's tutelage. Night descended fully, yet darkness was never complete. The orb and its emanations created a permanent canopy of luminescence, a sky within a sky, stars reflecting not only celestial patterns but the geometry of energy we were interacting with, and I realized that this was a form of learning that bypassed conventional senses, requiring complete immersion in perception and presence. We moved through sequences that increasingly mirrored natural phenomena. The flow of water, the arc of wind currents, the rhythmic pulse of life forms, all encoded in light and resonance, translating into exercises of comprehension, coordination, and empathy. And with each success, we felt subtly altered, more attuned, more aware of the vast interconnectedness that underpinned existence. Fiona's confidence grew, Malik's focus sharpened, Jonas's analytical mind reconciled with intuitive understanding, and I found myself in a state of sustained awareness, perceiving patterns not just in the immediate environment but across the basin, the desert, and, in fleeting glimpses, the cosmos itself, as though the alien's teaching had lifted the veil from a hidden dimension of consciousness. Towards midnight, the alien demonstrated what could only be described as a form of telekinetic interaction with the environment, moving the smaller spheres into complex formations that hovered and rotated independently, each responding to our gestures and presence, creating emergent patterns that were both beautiful and intricate. We discovered that small movements, shifts in focus, Even the cadence of our breaths influenced the formations, creating feedback loops that refined our coordination and deepened our understanding of resonance, balance, and timing, and each success produced a subtle yet profound reward. A cascade of light that washed over the basin, an internal sense of harmony, a fleeting clarity that words could not capture. Jonas's journal overflowed with sketches, patterns, and equations, yet he admitted, finally, that the true understanding could not be written down. It could only be experienced, internalized, and reflected in interaction. Malik and Fiona were similarly transformed, their interactions now guided by instinct and intuition, creating synchronized patterns that responded not only to the alien but to each other. A triad of human energy integrated with the extraterrestrial rhythm, and I felt the responsibility of learning alongside them, the humility of knowing that comprehension came with patience, attention, and respect for forces far beyond our prior experience. Hours blurred into one another, time losing its meaning entirely as the night unfolded, and I sensed a shift in the alien's purpose. The lessons were no longer incremental but holistic, guiding us toward a profound integration of perception, emotion, and cognition, a form of consciousness that transcended ordinary human experience. The orb spun and multiplied, creating overlapping sequences, fractal-like formations that expanded and contracted in response to our engagement, each interaction producing a harmony that was physically felt, emotionally understood, and mentally appreciated simultaneously. We were no longer merely observers or participants. We were co-creators within a luminous system, our presence shaping patterns as much as they shaped us, and the alien's role became that of a facilitator rather than a demonstrator, allowing us to explore, experiment, and internalize the principles it had patiently imparted over hours that felt like both moments and eternities. I realized that the desert itself was now fully integrated into the experience, a conscious extension of the alien's teaching, responding to our resonance, amplifying our alignment, and subtly guiding us toward comprehension that transcended human limitation. As dawn approached once more, the basin glowed with a soft, steady light, each orb pulsing in perfect harmony with our combined heartbeat, and I recognized that we had reached a threshold, a point at which understanding was not measured in intellectual knowledge but in experiential resonance, in the integration of thought, perception, and emotion with the flow of energy that the alien had demonstrated. Malik, Fiona, Jonas, and I exchanged glances, silent communication bridging words and thought, each aware that we had undergone a transformation, subtle yet profound, that would forever alter the way we perceived reality, consciousness, and the universe itself. The alien hovered nearby, observing with patience and grace, a sentinel of knowledge, and I felt a deep gratitude for the trust implicit in its guidance, the invitation into a system of awareness that could not be forced or demanded, only experienced and embraced. And though the future remained uncertain, the lessons of the night, the resonance of energy and light, the integration of mind, body, and environment, left us prepared, at least in part, for whatever revelations awaited in the hours and days to come, knowing that the Mojave Desert was no longer merely a backdrop for human endeavor, but a living, conscious space intertwined with forces beyond comprehension, waiting to reveal more of its secrets to those willing to perceive with attention, humility, and openness. As the first rays of morning stretched over the Mojave, painting the dunes in soft, shifting tones of gold and rose, a subtle transformation had occurred within all of us. Our senses were attuned to nuances we would never have noticed before, the faint hum of wind through the rocks, the barely perceptible oscillation of sand grains underfoot, the way light refracted across mineral surfaces in patterns that seemed intentional, meaningful, almost like a language, and we realized with quiet astonishment that the alien had not merely taught us to observe but to perceive, to decode the hidden symphony embedded within the desert itself, a resonance that existed independent of human constructs yet now intimately connected to our consciousness. Malik led the way with a newfound fluidity, his previous hesitations replaced by a measured, precise confidence, tracing gestures in the air that seemed to draw invisible lines connecting the pulses of the orb with the geometry of the basin. And as he moved, the orb responded, splitting into delicate strands of light that arced gracefully before reassembling, a visual representation of the energy flows he was intuitively learning to influence. Fiona followed closely, her hands tracing motions that caused the spheres to rotate in synchronized patterns, creating ephemeral constellations of luminous energy that danced across the rocks and sand. a choreography that neither of us could fully comprehend yet felt entirely natural, as though the desert had become a canvas and we the instruments of its expression. Jonas lingered slightly behind, recording patterns, sequences, and resonances in his journal, but he too was no longer merely an observer. His notes were alive with intuition, capturing the rhythm and pulse of the basin in ways that would have seemed absurd to him before this encounter. Yet now he was immersed, a bridge between analytical cognition and experiential resonance, translating the alien's energy-based teaching into humanly comprehensible data, even while acknowledging the futility of fully articulating the depth of what we were experiencing. We moved together in a careful, almost ritualistic rhythm, the orb and its smaller fragments pulsing and responding to each gesture, each breath, each subtle alignment of body and attention, and I felt a profound sense of unity not just among ourselves but with the alien and the desert, a network of awareness that transcended verbal communication, a flowing system of interaction that required presence, patience, and humility. The alien hovered slightly above the ground, its limbs tracing arcs and spirals that generated resonances in the light and energy, demonstrating principles of balance, timing, and interaction without a single uttered sound. Yet every pulse, every gesture, every shift communicated volumes, a sophisticated language of experience that demanded full engagement and rewarded alignment with expanded perception. I felt my mind opening to patterns previously inaccessible, my awareness stretched to integrate not only visual and auditory cues but the subtle rhythms of energy that pervaded the basin, sensing connections between movement, intention, and consequence in ways that defied ordinary understanding, and I marveled at the precision and elegance of this method, a teaching that bypassed conventional cognition and moved directly into the realm of intuitive comprehension. Each step became both exploration and instruction, every breath both a contribution and a lesson, and I understood that the alien's intent was not merely to communicate information but to immerse us in a form of understanding that transcended our species, a direct experience of resonance, energy, and consciousness intertwined. By mid-morning, the orb's movements had become increasingly complex, requiring precise coordination among us. Small deviations in gesture or timing produced immediate feedback through shifts in light and vibration, subtle but unmistakable, and I realized that the alien's approach was both didactic and evaluative, teaching us not only how to interact with energy patterns but also how to maintain focus, discipline, and attunement in the face of overwhelming stimulus. Malik adjusted his stance, subtly shifting his body to compensate for a misaligned pulse, and the orb responded, correcting its rotation and emitting a cascade of light that rippled across the basin. Fiona instinctively mirrored the adjustment, creating harmonized patterns between the spheres, while Jonas's notes documented the sequence, an interweaving of observation and participation that reflected the complexity of the system. I moved cautiously, learning to anticipate the subtle oscillations of the energy, feeling for resonance in the air and the ground beneath my feet, a vibration that guided intuition, signaling when alignment was achieved and when attention faltered, and I began to grasp the subtlety of the alien's teaching. That mastery was not a matter of force or dominance, but of attunement, empathy, and integration with a system far greater than ourselves. As the sun climbed higher, the desert around us responded. The sand shimmered with intensified luminescence, faint lines of light tracing natural contours, revealing hidden patterns in what had once seemed a chaotic landscape, and even distant rock formations pulsed softly in harmony with the orb, a subtle choreography that indicated a living environment engaged in this learning process. We navigated through sequences that increasingly mirrored cosmic and natural phenomena. Spirals reflecting galaxy formations, waves mimicking tidal energy, oscillations resembling the cycles of planetary motion, each pattern amplified by the orb's pulse and the alien's gestures, requiring us to internalize complex interdependencies and respond intuitively, in real time, to maintain coherence across the system. Malik moved fluidly through these sequences, his gestures precise, his attention unwavering, and I noticed the alien's presence responding with a subtle nod, a minor adjustment in orientation that reinforced alignment, encouraging further exploration while maintaining the integrity of the energetic framework. Fiona's contributions were equally delicate, her intuitive understanding allowing her to anticipate shifts before they occurred, a reflection of the alien's subtle calibration to our individual abilities. And Jonas continued to translate observations into schematic forms, attempting to capture the emergent properties of the interactions in a record that combined empirical data with the intangible quality of resonance, a document that would serve as both scientific record and personal chronicle of an experience beyond ordinary comprehension. By afternoon, the energy in the basin had intensified. The pulses were faster, more intricate, requiring simultaneous attention to multiple spheres, multiple patterns, and multiple dimensions of interaction, and I realized that the alien was now testing our ability to integrate perception, movement, and intuition in a cohesive manner. The challenge was immense. Small errors produced cascading feedback. Light flickered unevenly, pulses momentarily desynchronized. Yet these moments of disharmony were instructive, highlighting the subtle interdependence of factors within the system. We adapted, learning to anticipate one another's gestures, to harmonize breath and movement, to create a shared rhythm that restored balance to the orb and the smaller spheres, a resonance that produced waves of radiant illumination across the basin, enhancing not only our understanding but our confidence, our trust, and our connection to each other, the alien, and the desert itself. I felt a profound sense of humility, recognizing that this level of engagement required the suspension of ego, the surrender to experience, and the acceptance of guidance from forces both visible and invisible, a lesson in presence and participation that transcended any conventional educational paradigm. As the day drew to an end, the alien demonstrated a new dimension of interaction. The spheres began to respond to our emotional states, subtly amplifying, diminishing, or modulating their pulses according to our collective mental and emotional coherence, a phenomenon that forced us to cultivate focus, calm, and clarity. Malik, Fiona, Jonas, and I experimented, modulating our thoughts and gestures to achieve synchronization, and each success produced an unmistakable resonance across the basin, a feedback loop that reinforced both the principle and our comprehension. I became aware that this was a form of learning that transcended verbal explanation or physical demonstration. It was a direct integration of consciousness, emotion, and perception, a holistic approach that demanded presence in every sense of the word, and I felt both exhilarated and exhausted, overwhelmed by the depth of immersion and the scale of understanding required. The alien observed silently, guiding subtly, never interfering overtly, allowing us to discover principles through interaction and experience, a patient mentor in the art of energy, resonance, and interconnectivity. Nightfall brought no darkness, only a deepening of luminescence as the orb and spheres maintained a continuous canopy of soft light above the basin, revealing new patterns in the sand and rocks, subtle shifts in resonance, and hidden sequences previously imperceptible. We moved in harmony, anticipating and responding, creating cascading formations, spirals, and waves that resonated across the environment, integrating observation, intuition, and coordinated action. And I realized that we were no longer separate entities but part of a cohesive system that included each other, the alien, and the desert itself. Fiona's movements influenced the geometry of light, Malik's gestures modulated frequency and timing, Jonas's analytical mind translated emergent patterns into conceptual frameworks, and I contributed by sensing subtle fluctuations and harmonizing response, completing a quadrilateral of interaction that produced emergent coherence, a tangible experience of unity across multiple dimensions of perception and action. And in that moment, I felt the profound truth of the alien's presence. That comprehension, connection, and mastery were inseparable from humility, awareness, and the capacity to perceive beyond the ordinary, to engage with the unknown not as a conqueror but as a participant, attuned and receptive. By dawn, it became clear that we were approaching another threshold, one that promised not only deeper understanding of the orb and its energy but an encounter with a facet of consciousness more intricate and expansive than we had yet experienced. And though the challenges ahead were immense, the exhilaration of participation, the clarity of perception, and the profound connection to the alien and the luminous desert filled us with a courage and anticipation we had never known. The Mojave, once barren and indifferent, now pulsed with life and intelligence, a landscape alive with teaching, resonance, and subtle communication, waiting for those willing to perceive, to harmonize, and to transcend the limits of ordinary comprehension. And so, with hearts racing, minds alert, and senses fully engaged, we prepared to step forward once more, into an experience that promised revelation, challenge, and transformation, aware that the journey through this luminous, living desert was far from over and that every gesture, every thought, Every breath would shape the path and the understanding yet to unfold. The morning sun rose with an intensity that seemed almost deliberate, casting long shadows across the luminous basin. And yet even as the light of day poured over the sand and rocks, the glow of the orb and its smaller satellites persisted, pulsating in rhythmic harmony with our own heartbeats and filling the air with a subtle vibration that resonated deep within our bones. An internal hum that seemed to synchronize thought, breath, and movement in a way that felt both intimate and cosmic. We rose cautiously, aware that the alien's presence had already begun to recalibrate our perception of reality, that what we had experienced in the previous nights and days had fundamentally altered the way we sensed the world, and that each step we now took carried the potential to reveal new dimensions of understanding previously inaccessible to human cognition. Malik led the way, his movements fluid and precise, guided by an intuitive grasp of the orb's pulse and the energy flowing through the basin, and I noticed for the first time how his gestures seemed to create secondary resonances, subtle waves of energy that spread through the sand, the rocks, and even the smaller spheres, hinting at a layer of interaction we had not fully explored. Fiona followed closely, her hands hovering delicately over the orbs, coaxing luminous arcs into motion with movements that were part instinct, part learned response, and Jonas trailed just behind, pen poised, capturing not only observations but the underlying structure of the interactions, attempting to translate the alien's teaching into humanly understandable patterns while simultaneously acknowledging the impossibility of fully capturing the experience. As we moved deeper into the basin, the alien began to guide us towards sequences that were markedly more complex, orchestrations of light and energy that demanded precise timing, coordinated movement, and heightened awareness of resonance and balance. And I realized that this phase of our engagement was not merely instructive but transformative, a deliberate progression designed to expand our perceptual and cognitive boundaries. Each pulse of the orb now carried multiple layers of information. Subtle shifts in frequency that influenced the smaller spheres, variations in intensity that required instantaneous adjustment, and harmonic feedback that tested our ability to integrate individual perception with group coordination, forcing us to operate as a unified system rather than as separate entities, each human presence influencing and being influenced by the collective resonance of the basin. Malik, already adept, moved with increasing confidence, anticipating shifts before they occurred, creating fluid patterns that the orb amplified, while Fiona mirrored his movements with a complementary elegance, producing cascades of light that reflected both their alignment and their individual contributions, a visible testament to the emergent coherence between human action and alien energy. Jonas, meanwhile, alternated between observation and interaction, documenting sequences with meticulous attention while simultaneously contributing to the feedback loop, a bridge between intellectual comprehension and intuitive participation, and I found myself drawn into the rhythm, sensing, anticipating, and responding in ways that were entirely instinctual yet deeply connected to the principles the alien had been teaching since our arrival. Hours passed with the kind of intensity that made minutes feel like eternities and eternities like fleeting moments. The alien's presence remained a constant, patient, and guiding force, never intrusive, yet each subtle shift in its posture or movement altered the energy landscape of the basin, creating challenges and opportunities that demanded attention, adaptability, and empathy. The sand beneath our feet seemed to pulse in sympathy with the orb. The rocks emitted faint tones that blended into the harmonic structure, and even the air itself carried subtle vibrations that we could feel resonating through our chest and skull, a tactile reminder of the interconnectedness of all elements within the basin. Each successful sequence, each synchronized movement, elicited a cascade of radiant light, a confirmation of alignment and resonance that felt simultaneously aesthetic and instructive, reinforcing the alien's methodology. Comprehension through immersive, experiential interaction, a direct interface between consciousness and energy, perception and action, thought and resonance. I became aware of the subtle evolution of my own perception. I could sense patterns before they fully materialized, anticipate shifts in light and energy, and intuitively adjust my responses in harmony with both the alien and my companions, a transformation that was exhilarating, humbling, and profoundly disorienting all at once. By midday, a noticeable change had occurred within the basin itself. The luminescent patterns had become increasingly intricate, weaving fractal geometries across the sand, arcs of light connecting mineral formations, spheres orbiting one another in complex choreography, and shadows stretching and retracting in response to our collective interaction, suggesting a dynamic intelligence inherent in the environment as well as in the aliens' guidance. The orb divided repeatedly, forming lattices of light that required precise interaction on multiple planes, forcing us to coordinate thought, breath, and gesture with unprecedented accuracy, and the aliens' subtle adjustments. Raising a limb, tilting its elongated torso, adjusting the rotation of the central orb, served as both instruction and validation, reinforcing alignment while guiding us toward deeper understanding. Fiona's intuitive responses now operated on multiple levels. She could influence the light in one plane while anticipating changes in another, her gestures creating cascading patterns that were both deliberate and emergent, while Malik executed complementary sequences, reinforcing the structural integrity of the energetic lattice, and Jonas documented the entirety, translating multidimensional interactions into diagrams, symbols, and notes that would forever serve as an imperfect record of the extraordinary phenomena we were experiencing. By afternoon, the intensity of the interaction had heightened. The orb's pulses became more rapid, more intricate, and the smaller spheres moved independently yet harmoniously, creating overlapping waves of light and resonance that required instantaneous, synchronized responses. We were forced to integrate visual perception, proprioception, and emotional attunement simultaneously, and every lapse produced immediate feedback. A flicker of light, a subtle shift in vibration, a cascade of resonance that reinforced the importance of precise alignment. I realized that the aliens' methodology was both educational and evaluative. It taught through interaction while assessing the depth of our engagement, our capacity for integration, and our ability to maintain coherence in the face of increasing complexity. A subtle but undeniable test of skill, perception, and character. Malik's movements remained fluid and adaptive. Fiona's gestures grew more confident and expressive. Jonas's documentation captured both emergent properties and underlying principles, and I contributed by sensing subtle fluctuations, harmonizing responses, and integrating my perception with the collective rhythm of the group, a process that produced a profound sense of connection and interdependence. As dusk approached, the alien introduced what could only be described as a multidimensional challenge. Sequences of light and resonance that operated across overlapping planes, simultaneously spatial, temporal, and energetic, requiring us to perceive, interpret, and respond across multiple axes of interaction. The task demanded total immersion, mental clarity, and emotional equilibrium, and it became evident that mastery was less about individual skill and more about our collective ability to operate as a unified system, attuned to the nuances of resonance, timing, and interaction. The orb and its satellites created spirals, arcs, and fractal patterns that intertwined with our movements, and every successful response produced feedback in the form of light, vibration, and subtle harmonic resonance, reinforcing the alien's instruction while challenging our capacity for synchronization and focus. I sensed my consciousness expanding, integrating not only visual and tactile cues but also subtle emotional signals, intuitive insights, and anticipatory responses, a holistic engagement that transcended ordinary human perception and approached an intimate interface with the principles underlying the alien system. Night fell fully, yet the luminous glow of the orb persisted, bathing the basin in radiant, multicolored light, and I realized that our engagement had entered a new phase, one of holistic integration, in which our individual awareness merged seamlessly with the collective rhythm, producing emergent patterns of coherence, resonance, and insight. Malik's gestures influenced multiple planes of interaction simultaneously. Fiona's intuitive understanding guided the flow of light and energy. Jonas documented the intricate interactions with an unprecedented blend of scientific rigor and poetic insight, and I contributed by harmonizing subtle shifts, integrating emotional resonance, and sensing emerging patterns before they became fully manifest. The alien remained a patient observer and facilitator, allowing us autonomy while providing subtle guidance, reinforcing the principle that true understanding was born of experience, integration, and presence rather than passive observation or intellectual deduction. In this moment, I felt a profound connection to the alien, to my companions, and to the desert itself, an awareness that transcended conventional perception and revealed the hidden architecture of energy, consciousness, and interconnectivity underlying reality. Hours, or perhaps minutes, for time no longer followed linear constraints, passed with sustained immersion, sequences of light and resonance becoming increasingly complex, demanding simultaneous attention to multiple dimensions of interaction, and we responded with precision, intuition, and emotional attunement, producing emergent patterns that reflected both our engagement and the aliens' teaching. I became acutely aware that this phase of interaction was as much about personal transformation as it was about comprehension, that the aliens' methodology sought to cultivate awareness, presence, and harmony, not merely knowledge, and that every gesture, breath, and thought carried significance within the luminous system of the basin. The desert responded to our engagement, subtle waves of illumination rippling across the sand, reflections dancing along rock faces, shadows elongating and contracting in synchrony, creating a dynamic, living environment that reinforced our connection, our understanding, and our evolving capacity to participate meaningfully in the alien system. And as I moved in concert with Malik, Fiona, and Jonas, I sensed that this was not merely an encounter with another species, but an initiation into a mode of perception, awareness, and interaction that would forever alter our understanding of life, energy, and consciousness. By the break of the next day, it was clear that we had reached a threshold in our engagement, one that promised not only deeper understanding of the orb and its energy systems but a glimpse into the aliens' broader intentions, the principles underpinning its technology and consciousness, and the profound interconnectivity between the desert, the being, and ourselves. The Mojave, once a barren landscape, had become a living, responsive system, a vast teaching environment imbued with intelligence, resonance, and purpose, and we were participants, observers, and co-creators, aware that every gesture, thought, and breath would shape both our understanding and the ongoing interaction. And as the orb pulsed gently above the central basin, the alien hovered with patient grace, inviting us to take the next step in a journey that promised revelation, challenge, and transformation. Aware that the experiences yet to unfold would demand courage, presence, and unwavering attention. The following morning, the basin seemed to breathe with a rhythm all its own, a subtle expansion and contraction of light and energy that resonated with our own pulses and created an almost hypnotic sense of connection. The orb hovered above the fissure, spinning in a slow, deliberate rotation, casting soft, shifting illumination across the sand and rocks, and I realized that the alien had begun to introduce us to sequences that transcended the tangible patterns we had been mastering, guiding us instead toward interactions that were simultaneously physical, cognitive, and emotional, an integrated practice of perception, resonance, and intention that demanded full immersion and unwavering attention. Malik moved first, his gestures precise yet fluid, directing arcs of light and energy through the smaller spheres that seemed to respond with subtle nuances, each pulse of the orb conveying feedback, approval, or correction, and I observed with fascination how his body and mind had adapted to this heightened mode of engagement, how his awareness now extended beyond the immediate visual field to encompass vibrations, subtleties in resonance, and the faint, almost imperceptible shifts in energy that indicated alignment or misalignment. Fiona mirrored his movements, instinctively anticipating shifts in the spheres and responding with gestures that were both deliberate and intuitive, creating cascading patterns of light that reflected a profound integration of perception and intention, while Jonas documented the emergent sequences with a meticulous combination of scientific observation and interpretive insight, capturing both structure and nuance in a way that could, at best, approximate the depth of experience while acknowledging the impossibility of fully translating it into human language or symbols. As we progressed, the alien began to introduce multi-layered challenges, sequences of movement, pulse, and resonance that required simultaneous attention to multiple variables, demanding not only precision but adaptability and sustained focus, and I became aware of the subtle yet powerful way it calibrated the difficulty based on our responses, increasing complexity when we achieved alignment and easing constraints when disharmony arose, a dynamic teaching method that blended instruction, assessment, and encouragement seamlessly. The orb divided into an array of smaller spheres that rotated, oscillated, and intersected in patterns that were both beautiful and demanding, requiring coordinated interaction from all four of us. A demonstration that mastery of this system was inherently collaborative, dependent on the synchronization of mind, body, and emotion across individuals, and I felt the weight of responsibility for both my own alignment and for contributing to the collective resonance, aware that even minor deviations could ripple across the system and create feedback that altered the patterns in real time. Malik's movements became increasingly precise, almost preternaturally so, while Fiona's intuitive grasp allowed her to anticipate shifts before they materialized, producing harmonized sequences that stabilized the orb and the smaller spheres. And Jonas worked tirelessly to interpret the emergent geometry, translating it into frameworks that captured the interplay of energy, light, and resonance in ways that bridged analytical reasoning and experiential understanding, while I contributed by sensing subtleties, modulating my own gestures, and integrating my perception with the collective rhythm, a delicate balance that demanded both focus and flexibility. By mid-morning, the energy in the basin had intensified noticeably. The pulses of the orb now oscillated with a frequency and intricacy that tested our limits, forcing rapid adjustment and heightened attention to the interactions between the spheres, the patterns in the sand, and the subtle cues from the aliens' gestures, and I realized that this phase was intended to push us toward a deeper level of integration, where cognitive analysis, intuitive understanding, and emotional resonance operated as a unified system. Each successful sequence produced immediate, tangible feedback, arcs of light that radiated outward, subtle vibrations in the sand, changes in the orbital patterns of the spheres, all signaling alignment and coherence, while errors produced brief disruptions that were instructive, revealing the delicate interdependence of factors within the energetic system. Malik and Fiona moved with growing confidence, their gestures increasingly fluid, their attention synchronized with both the orb and each other, while Jonas documented the sequences with a focus that reflected not only analytical rigor, but also an emergent appreciation for the aesthetic and experiential dimensions of the patterns, and I found myself drawn deeper into the flow, intuitively sensing the next necessary gestures, anticipating shifts in energy, and harmonizing my contributions with those of my companions and the larger system of the basin. As the day unfolded, the alien guided us through increasingly complex sequences, introducing elements that were both spatial and temporal, requiring anticipation, memory, and the integration of multiple sensory inputs simultaneously, and I felt the exhilaration of engaging with an intelligence that transcended conventional understanding, challenging us to perceive, adapt, and respond in ways that extended the limits of human cognition and coordination. The orb and its satellites created a dynamic, multidimensional lattice of light, moving in response to our gestures and our focus, producing patterns that were at once intricate, elegant, and instructive, a visual and sensory manifestation of the principles the alien sought to impart: balance, harmony, resonance, and the integration of perception with intention. Fiona's movements were particularly graceful, her intuition allowing her to navigate shifts before they materialized, producing cascades of light that stabilized and amplified the orb's pattern, while Malik's deliberate adjustments reinforced structural coherence, and Jonas's notes captured not only the geometry and timing but the emergent qualities, the subtle interplay of energy and resonance that could not be quantified but could be experienced, recorded as approximation and interpretation, rather than definitive truth. I contributed by sensing subtle deviations, harmonizing gestures, and anticipating emergent patterns, a role that required both focus and humility, an acknowledgement that mastery in this system was a function of attunement rather than dominance, of responsiveness rather than command. By afternoon, the challenge had escalated. Sequences now involved multiple spheres interacting simultaneously across different planes, producing overlapping pulses of light and energy that required precise coordination among all four of us, and I realized that this stage of engagement was a test of both skill and cohesion, an exploration of how human cognition and perception could integrate with an alien system of resonance, energy, and awareness. The orb responded to our collective alignment, stabilizing, rotating, and emitting radiant pulses when we achieved coherence, while flickers and minor distortions appeared when our timing or attention faltered, a constant, subtle feedback loop that guided our learning. Malik's gestures became almost instinctive, an extension of his own internal sense of rhythm and resonance, while Fiona's movements demonstrated a growing synthesis of intuition, observation, and interaction, producing patterns that were as complex as they were harmonious. Jonas continued to interpret and document, translating visual and energetic sequences into symbolic forms, equations, and diagrams, attempting to bridge the gap between human understanding and the alien methodology, while I focused on sensing emergent patterns, harmonizing our collective responses and maintaining alignment with the subtle cues from the orb and the alien, a delicate dance that demanded attention, flexibility, and sustained engagement. As the light of late afternoon softened, the alien introduced what could only be described as a challenge in temporal resonance, sequences in which timing and anticipation were crucial, and even the slightest misalignment produced feedback that rippled across the system, testing our ability to integrate perception, intuition, and action in real time. The orb and its satellites moved with increasing complexity, producing overlapping cycles of light, pulse, and rotation, requiring us to anticipate sequences across multiple dimensions, synchronize gestures, and maintain coherence under rapidly shifting conditions. Each successful cycle produced radiant feedback, waves of illumination, subtle harmonic vibration, and moments of profound clarity that reinforced alignment and encouraged further exploration, while errors produced gentle but unmistakable corrections, guiding us toward precision, focus, and harmony. Malik's movements remained fluid and confident, Fiona's gestures intuitive and anticipatory, Jonas's documentation both analytical and interpretive, and I continued to harmonize, sensing deviations, adjusting responses, and contributing to the coherence of the collective system, a delicate interplay of observation, perception, and action that demanded sustained presence. By evening, the desert itself seemed fully engaged in our interaction. Subtle waves of light shimmered across the sand, rock faces glowed faintly in response to our movements, and shadows shifted and stretched in patterns that reflected our collective rhythm, as though the Mojave had become an extension of the alien's teaching, a living, responsive environment that amplified and reinforced our learning. The orb's pulses had reached a frequency and complexity that bordered on overwhelming, yet within this challenge we found exhilaration, cohesion, and a deepened sense of connection, not only to the alien and each other but to the desert as an intelligent, perceptive entity. Fiona and Malik moved in near-perfect synchrony, their gestures producing intricate, cascading formations that stabilized and amplified the orb's lattice, while Jonas captured both structure and emergent nuance, bridging empirical observation with experiential interpretation, and I contributed by sensing subtle fluctuations, harmonizing timing, and intuitively guiding minor adjustments, fully immersed in the integrated system of energy, resonance, and consciousness. As night fell, the orb and its satellites maintained a soft, radiant glow that illuminated the basin in multicolored light, and I realized that our engagement had entered a new phase, one of total integration, where observation, action, emotion, and cognition operated as a unified system, producing emergent coherence, resonance, and understanding. Each gesture, breath, and focus contributed to the patterns of light, energy, and movement, and every deviation was both instructive and integrative, reinforcing the principle that mastery was inseparable from attunement, presence, and awareness. Malik's gestures were precise and instinctive, Fiona's movements intuitive and fluid, Jonas's documentation analytical yet interpretive, and I harmonized subtle deviations, anticipating emergent sequences and ensuring coherence across multiple dimensions. The alien hovered nearby, observing with patient grace, providing subtle guidance and reinforcement without interference, a facilitator rather than a demonstrator, and I felt the profound significance of its method. Comprehension through experience, integration, and resonance, a teaching that transcended human understanding yet was fully accessible through immersion, attention, and participation. The desert pulsed, the orbs rotated, and the luminous patterns intertwined with our movements, a living, dynamic symphony of energy, consciousness, and perception, and I understood with clarity that this was far more than a test or lesson. It was an initiation into a system of awareness that would forever alter our perception, our cognition, and our understanding of reality itself. As dawn broke over the Mojave, casting a soft pink and amber glow across the sand and jagged rocks, the basin seemed alive with subtle, flowing currents of energy, a phenomenon that had become increasingly apparent over the past days. Yet today it felt magnified, almost sentient, as though the desert itself anticipated our presence and adjusted in real time to our collective awareness. The orb and its satellites hovered above the central fissure, rotating and pulsating in intricate patterns that required heightened precision, coordination, and emotional resonance, and I realized that the alien had introduced a new level of complexity, sequences that demanded simultaneous engagement of mind, body, intuition, and emotion, creating an immersive system of perception and interaction that transcended conventional understanding. Malik moved first, his gestures confident, fluid, and precise, each movement generating cascading arcs of light that propagated through the smaller spheres, producing subtle vibrations that resonated through the sand, rocks, and our bodies, and I noticed the way his attention had evolved, now encompassing not only the immediate visual patterns but the faint, almost imperceptible shifts in resonance, the microfluctuations in energy that signaled alignment or misalignment with the orb and the surrounding environment. Fiona followed with her characteristic grace and intuition, gestures flowing in harmony with Malik's sequences, creating complex, emergent patterns of light and energy that appeared as both deliberate instruction and spontaneous evolution, while Jonas documented the intricate geometries, oscillations, and interactions, translating ephemeral patterns into notes, diagrams, and symbolic approximations, acknowledging the impossibility of fully capturing the depth of experience while striving to bridge human cognition with alien methodology. I moved in tandem, sensing subtle shifts, harmonizing our responses, and intuitively adjusting my gestures, contributing to the emergent coherence of the system and integrating perception, emotion, and cognition in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. By mid-morning, the orb's oscillations had increased in frequency and intricacy, the smaller satellites moving in overlapping sequences that demanded simultaneous coordination across multiple axes, requiring rapid adaptation, heightened focus, and sustained emotional alignment. I realized that this phase was designed to push us into a holistic engagement, testing not just skill or memory but our capacity to integrate perception, intuition, and intention in real time within a dynamic, responsive system. Malik's fluidity of movement allowed him to anticipate shifts before they occurred, producing harmonized sequences that stabilized the orb and its satellites, while Fiona's intuitive grasp permitted her to navigate emergent patterns with elegance, creating cascading formations of light that reflected a perfect balance of responsiveness and anticipation. Jonas continued his documentation, his meticulous notes capturing the geometry, timing, and emergent qualities of the interactions, translating multidimensional energy flows into forms comprehensible to human cognition, while I contributed by sensing subtle fluctuations, adjusting gestures to harmonize with emergent sequences, and maintaining coherence across the complex lattice of movement and resonance, fully immersed in a living system that integrated energy, perception, and consciousness. The alien observed silently, a patient facilitator, introducing subtle adjustments, raising a limb, shifting orientation, or modifying the orb's pulse, guiding us gently toward greater alignment without interference, reinforcing the principle that true comprehension required experience, presence, and attunement rather than abstract analysis alone. By afternoon, the energy in the basin had intensified noticeably. The orb and satellites created spirals, arcs, and lattice patterns that operated simultaneously across multiple planes, requiring anticipatory coordination, heightened sensitivity to resonance, and careful synchronization of breath, gesture, and attention. Even minor deviations produced immediate feedback, flickers of light, shifts in pulse, or subtle distortions in the lattice, indicating both error and opportunity, a real-time guide to alignment and integration. Malik's gestures became increasingly instinctual, an extension of his perception and understanding of resonance, while Fiona anticipated shifts with remarkable precision, her movements weaving stability and fluidity into the emergent patterns, and Jonas translated these dynamic interactions into analytical diagrams, symbolic interpretations, and descriptive frameworks, bridging the gap between ephemeral experience and human comprehension. I focused on subtle deviations, harmonizing the system, intuitively sensing the necessary gestures, and synchronizing my contributions with the evolving rhythm, aware that every movement, thought, and emotional state influenced the collective resonance, shaping the emergent system in both visible and imperceptible ways. The desert itself seemed to respond, the sand shimmering with faint pulses of reflected light, shadows stretching and contracting in tandem with our gestures, rocks resonating subtly, and even the air carrying a faint vibration that merged with the orb's energy, as though the environment had become an active participant in our learning. As the day progressed, the alien introduced sequences that demanded temporal anticipation, multidimensional interaction, and the integration of complex energy flows across overlapping planes, a challenge that seemed to test the limits of human perception, cognition, and coordination. Each sequence required simultaneous awareness of multiple elements: the movement of the orb, the oscillation of satellites, the interaction of light and shadow, and the microfluctuations in resonance that revealed alignment or dissonance. And we had to respond with coordinated gestures, synchronized breath, and intentional focus, balancing precision with intuitive adaptation. Malik and Fiona's coordination reached a remarkable level of harmony, their movements producing emergent patterns that stabilized and amplified the orb's lattice, while Jonas translated the sequences into symbolic representations, equations, and diagrams, an imperfect but essential record of the experience that captured both structure and nuance. I contributed by sensing emergent fluctuations, adjusting my gestures to restore coherence, and anticipating changes in rhythm and resonance, fully immersed in the integration of perception, intention, and action. The alien remained a patient guide, offering subtle adjustments to the orb's behavior, responding to our collective engagement, and demonstrating through example the principles of resonance, balance, and integration that underpinned its teaching. By late afternoon, a notable shift occurred in the basin. The orb and satellites began responding not only to our gestures but also to emotional resonance, subtly amplifying, diminishing, or modulating pulses based on our collective mental and emotional alignment. This introduced an entirely new layer of complexity, requiring us to cultivate not only focus and precision but calm, coherence, and emotional attunement, an integration of mind, body, and feeling that elevated the interaction beyond technical mastery into a holistic engagement of consciousness. Malik adjusted gestures with subtlety, synchronizing not only spatial patterns but emotional resonance. Fiona contributed nuanced adjustments, producing cascading formations of light that harmonized the orb's pulse, and Jonas recorded these interactions, noting the subtle interplay of intention, perception, and resonance, while I sensed emergent emotional patterns, modulated my responses, and contributed to the coherence of the collective experience. The orb's pulses became richer, more layered, reflecting the depth of our engagement, and I felt an unprecedented connection, not only to my companions and the alien but to the desert itself, a living, responsive environment fully integrated into the teaching system, amplifying our awareness and reinforcing the principles of harmony, alignment, and resonance. As dusk approached, the sequences reached a level of intricacy that required total immersion. Spatial, temporal, and emotional dimensions overlapped, demanding anticipatory perception, fluid response, and synchronized interaction across multiple planes of movement and energy. Every pulse, gesture, and breath influenced the emergent lattice, and each small adjustment produced immediate feedback, a constant reinforcement of principle and a guide to further alignment. Malik's movements flowed with extraordinary precision, anticipating and shaping patterns before they fully materialized, while Fiona's gestures remained fluid, elegant, and responsive, producing cascading sequences that stabilized and amplified the orb's energy. Jonas documented the emergent phenomena with meticulous attention, capturing both measurable structure and subtle, qualitative aspects, bridging experience and understanding, while I contributed by sensing microfluctuations, harmonizing gestures, and adjusting rhythm, a process of integration that demanded presence, focus, and humility. The alien observed silently, providing subtle cues, demonstrating principles through minimal but deliberate action, guiding us toward mastery not through instruction but through immersion and experience, a patient mentor facilitating our transformation into participants within a system of awareness far beyond ordinary human perception. Night fell fully, yet the orb and satellites maintained a luminous canopy, casting a radiant, multicolored glow across the basin that revealed hidden patterns in sand, stone, and shadow, a visual language that demanded interpretation, interaction, and integration. Sequences continued, increasingly challenging, requiring synchronization across space, time, and emotional resonance, and I felt the exhilaration of total immersion, the thrill of operating as a unified system with my companions, the alien, and the responsive desert. Malik and Fiona moved in perfect synchrony, gestures flowing seamlessly, producing complex cascades of light and energy, while Jonas translated emergent patterns into conceptual frameworks, diagrams, and interpretive notes, and I harmonized subtle deviations, anticipated shifts, and integrated perception, action, and emotion into a coherent, dynamic whole. The alien's presence, patient and deliberate, guided, reinforced, and inspired, teaching us that mastery required not control but attunement, not intellect alone but presence, empathy, and resonance, and I sensed the profound significance of this lesson. That true comprehension existed not in explanation but in experience, not in observation alone but in active, integrative participation. By the approach of midnight, it became clear that we had reached a new threshold, one in which our collective perception, action, and emotional resonance had integrated to such a degree that we were capable of engaging with sequences and patterns of light, energy, and movement previously incomprehensible. A holistic engagement that blurred the lines between human, alien, and environment, and promised revelations and challenges yet to come. The Mojave had become more than a backdrop. It was a living, conscious participant, intertwined with the alien, the orb, and ourselves, a responsive system of awareness that demanded attention, humility, and integration, offering guidance and insight to those willing to perceive, harmonize, and transcend ordinary limitations. And as the glowing lattice of spheres rotated above us, casting iridescent patterns across sand and rock, we prepared for the next phase of exploration, fully aware that what awaited would challenge every aspect of perception, cognition, and consciousness, pushing the boundaries of understanding in ways we could scarcely imagine. The early light of dawn broke over the Mojave, stretching long, sharp shadows across the crystalline sand, and immediately I felt the basin itself pulse with expectation, as though the desert had anticipated this day and was ready to reveal deeper layers of its energy, intricacy, and intelligence. The orb hovered above the central fissure, spinning with a rhythm that had become familiar yet constantly surprising, and the smaller satellites rotated around it in patterns that seemed almost organic, undulating, responsive not merely to our movements but to our very presence, our emotional and cognitive states, and the subtle shifts in resonance that flowed through the basin. Malik moved first, stepping lightly on the luminous sand, gestures precise yet flowing, weaving arcs of energy that propagated through the smaller spheres, each pulse generating faint vibrations that I could feel in my chest and along my spine, and I marveled at the way his perception had evolved, how his attention now encompassed both immediate physical patterns and imperceptible oscillations in the energy around us, a sensitivity that approached a kind of synesthetic awareness. Fiona followed, her gestures flowing in intuitive alignment with Malik's, producing cascading sequences of light and energy that seemed alive, dynamic, responsive, almost conscious in their interaction. And I realized that the integration of their movements, intention, and perception was producing emergent phenomena, patterns that could not have been generated by any one of us alone, yet arose from the synergy of human cognition, intuition, and the alien's guidance. Jonas trailed close behind, pen poised, sketching, noting, interpreting the interplay of energy, light, and movement, translating ephemeral, multidimensional sequences into symbols and diagrams, a painstaking attempt to render the untranslatable into human comprehension, while I contributed by sensing subtle oscillations, adjusting gestures in real time, and harmonizing our collective actions, creating a coherent resonance that linked all four of us with the luminous, living environment. By mid-morning, the orb's oscillations had become more complex, demanding attention not only to visual patterns but to temporal sequences and multidimensional resonance, requiring us to anticipate movements across overlapping planes and to maintain coherence in a constantly shifting lattice of energy. The alien's teaching had reached a stage in which mastery was no longer merely a function of observation or repetition, but of integration, of perceiving the entire system simultaneously while responding with precise, intentional, and emotionally attuned action. Malik moved with remarkable fluidity, his gestures perfectly synchronized with the subtle pulses of the orb, producing secondary effects in the satellites that amplified and refined the emergent lattice, while Fiona navigated the multi-layered sequences with intuitive elegance, responding to shifts before they fully materialized, creating cascading patterns of light and energy that reflected both anticipation and adaptive precision. Jonas continued to document, capturing not only measurable properties, rotation, pulse, spatial orientation, but the qualitative emergent aspects, the interplay of human attention, emotional resonance, and environmental feedback, bridging experiential insight with analytical comprehension. I focused on subtle deviations, harmonizing our actions, anticipating emergent fluctuations, and integrating my perception with the collective system, fully immersed in a state of flow in which cognition, intuition, and emotion operated in seamless synergy with the aliens' guiding presence and the desert's living energy. By noon, the basin itself seemed fully alive. Sand rippled with subtle pulses of reflected light, rock formations emitted faint harmonic tones, and shadows elongated and contracted in synchrony with the orb's rotations and our gestures. As though the entire environment had become an extension of the aliens' teaching, a responsive, conscious participant in our learning. The orb divided into multiple smaller spheres that rotated independently yet harmoniously, producing overlapping sequences of light and resonance that required simultaneous attention and coordinated action, testing our ability to perceive and respond across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Malik's movements remained fluid and precise, his understanding of the energy lattice and resonance refined through days of interaction, while Fiona's intuitive gestures produced emergent patterns that reinforced and stabilized the orb's dynamic structures, cascading sequences that both guided and challenged our collective engagement. Jonas recorded the complexity meticulously, his notes an intricate weave of observation, hypothesis, and interpretation, bridging analytic thought and the experiential knowledge generated through direct interaction, while I harmonized subtle microfluctuations, adjusting gesture, breath, and focus to ensure coherence across the system, fully aware that even minor deviations could ripple through the network and alter emergent sequences in ways both subtle and profound. As the afternoon wore on, the alien began to introduce sequences that incorporated emotional resonance as an essential factor, requiring alignment not only of movement and perception but also of inner state. The pulses of the orb and satellites responded to our collective mental and emotional coherence, amplifying, modulating, or shifting based on our attunement. This layer of interaction required not only attention to visual and energetic cues but conscious cultivation of focus, calm, and emotional clarity, a holistic integration of mind, body, and effect that transformed the engagement into something profoundly immersive. Malik adjusted his gestures to harmonize spatial and emotional resonance, producing cascading effects across the lattice, while Fiona's intuitive responsiveness modulated sequences in real time, stabilizing emergent structures through subtle emotional attunement. Jonas interpreted and documented the multi-layered interactions, creating a visual and symbolic representation of complex relationships between physical action, energy resonance, and emotional alignment, and I contributed by sensing minute fluctuations, adjusting gestures to maintain coherence, and integrating cognitive, emotional, and perceptual feedback into a holistic, unified response. The orb's pulses grew richer, more multidimensional, reflecting the depth of our integration and creating a dynamic feedback system that reinforced alignment, adaptation, and collective mastery. By late afternoon, sequences had evolved into multidimensional challenges spanning space, time, and energy, requiring predictive perception, anticipatory movement, and coordinated interaction across overlapping planes. Every gesture, breath, and focus contributed to the emergent lattice of resonance, creating patterns that were simultaneously structured, fluid, and dynamic. Malik's movements demonstrated near-perfect fluidity, integrating anticipation, adjustment, and resonance, while Fiona navigated the sequences with intuitive precision, producing emergent formations of light that stabilized and amplified the orb's energy lattice. Jonas continued his work of translation and documentation, capturing both structure and nuance, providing an analytical lens through which the untranslatable experience could be partially understood and shared, while I focused on sensing microfluctuations, harmonizing sequences, and anticipating emergent patterns, a delicate yet exhilarating integration of cognition, intuition, and emotional resonance. The desert itself seemed to participate fully, sand shimmering with reflected light, rocks resonating faintly in response to our gestures, and shadows shifting dynamically in alignment with the orb and satellites, creating an environment that reinforced the principles of coherence, synchronization, and attuned awareness that underpinned the aliens' teaching methodology. As dusk approached, the sequences reached a level of complexity that required complete immersion. Spatial, temporal, and emotional dimensions overlapped, creating a challenge that demanded simultaneous awareness, anticipatory adjustment, and precise coordination across multiple levels of interaction. Every misalignment produced immediate feedback, a flicker, a shift, a ripple, highlighting the importance of attentiveness, adaptation, and integration, while successful synchronization produced radiant pulses, cascading light, and subtle harmonic resonance, reinforcing the emergent coherence. Malik moved with fluid confidence, anticipating changes, correcting minor deviations, and reinforcing overall alignment. Fiona's intuitive gestures produced elegant, cascading sequences that harmonized and amplified the orb's lattice. Jonas documented emergent patterns, structures, and resonance, bridging experiential insight with analytical comprehension. And I integrated perception, action, and emotion, harmonizing sequences, anticipating emergent changes, and maintaining coherence across all levels. The alien hovered nearby, its movements minimal but deliberate, guiding subtly, reinforcing principles of resonance, balance, and attunement, demonstrating through example the integration of perception, cognition, and emotion, and reminding us that mastery was a function of presence, awareness, and participation rather than control or intellect alone. Night fell fully, yet the orb and satellites maintained their luminous presence, casting a multicolored glow that revealed hidden patterns, subtle oscillations, and emergent structures in the sand, rocks, and shadows. Sequences continued, increasingly complex and multi-layered, requiring precise coordination, anticipatory perception, and emotional attunement. Malik and Fiona moved in remarkable synchrony, gestures weaving together across space and time, producing emergent, cascading patterns that stabilized and amplified the orb's energy lattice. Jonas translated these interactions into diagrams, symbolic approximations, and conceptual frameworks, bridging experiential understanding and human cognition, while I sensed subtle deviations, harmonized microfluctuations, and maintained coherence across the system, fully immersed in the multidimensional, interactive lattice of perception, energy, and consciousness. The alien remained patient and deliberate, facilitating through minimal intervention, guiding us toward integration and mastery by allowing experience and participation to shape comprehension, reinforcing the lesson that understanding is not imposed but realized through engagement and resonance. By the approaching midnight, we had reached a threshold in which human perception, emotional resonance, and cognitive integration operated as a cohesive system capable of interacting meaningfully with the alien, the orb, and the living desert, producing emergent patterns and coherence that transcended ordinary understanding and promised deeper revelations yet to unfold. The Mojave was no longer merely a backdrop. It had become a conscious, responsive participant, a living system entwined with the alien and ourselves, demanding attention, humility, and presence, offering insight and instruction to those capable of perceiving, harmonizing, and transcending prior limitations. And as the orb's lattice rotated above us, casting iridescent, dynamic patterns across the basin, I understood that what awaited in the next phase would challenge every dimension of perception, consciousness, and engagement, pushing the boundaries of human understanding in ways we could scarcely imagine. Yet we were ready, attuned, and fully immersed in the luminous, intelligent, and transformative system that had become our reality. The first light of dawn spilled over the Mojave, illuminating the basin with a soft, rose-gold glow that shimmered against the undulating dunes, and immediately I felt the desert pulse with a rhythm that had grown increasingly complex over the previous days, almost sentient in its responsiveness, as though the environment itself had been waiting for this moment to reveal a deeper level of interaction, a hidden dimension of resonance that extended beyond mere light and energy into consciousness, perception, and intention. The orb hovered above the central fissure, spinning with deliberate precision, and the smaller satellites moved in interlocking, oscillating patterns that demanded both anticipation and precise response, their luminous arcs reflecting and refracting against the rock and sand to create cascading sequences that were at once beautiful, instructive, and profoundly alive. Malik stepped forward first, his movements fluid and instinctive, a seamless integration of gesture, perception, and intention, producing ripples of energy that flowed through the smaller spheres and echoed faintly in the sand beneath our feet, a resonance I could feel deep in my chest and along my spine, and I marveled at how his perception had evolved, how his awareness now encompassed multiple planes simultaneously, visual patterns, temporal sequences, harmonic resonance, and the subtle oscillations of emotional and cognitive alignment. Fiona followed, her gestures perfectly synchronized with Malik's, flowing in intuitive harmony to produce cascading, self-correcting patterns that responded to slight deviations, stabilized emergent sequences, and amplified the lattice of energy, while Jonas moved with meticulous focus, documenting interactions in a combination of visual diagrams, symbolic notation, and interpretive description, attempting to render the untranslatable comprehensible to the human mind, capturing the dynamic interplay of structure, resonance, and emergent behavior. I moved in tandem, sensing microfluctuations in energy, harmonizing sequences, anticipating emergent shifts, and integrating perception, intention, and emotion into a coherent contribution to the collective lattice, fully immersed in a system of interaction that blended human cognition, alien methodology, and environmental responsiveness into a singular, dynamic whole. By mid-morning, the complexity of the sequences had intensified. The orb and satellites now operated in overlapping patterns across multiple dimensions, creating a dynamic, multi-layered lattice of light and energy that required continuous, anticipatory engagement, and I realized that the alien had begun introducing what could only be described as challenges in emergent multidimensional resonance, forcing us to coordinate across spatial, temporal, and emotional axes simultaneously. Malik's gestures were increasingly fluid, almost automatic in their precision, his perception extending beyond the immediate visual field to sense subtle oscillations in energy that indicated alignment or potential disruption, while Fiona's intuitive responses produced cascading sequences that harmonized and stabilized the system, maintaining emergent coherence despite the increasing complexity. Jonas documented these interactions with an analytical rigor that captured geometry, timing, harmonic feedback, and emotional resonance, a record that served as a bridge between the experience we were living and the human capacity to understand and communicate it. While I sensed fluctuations imperceptible to the eye, adjusted gestures to restore balance, and anticipated shifts in sequence, contributing to the emergent flow with an integration of attention, perception, and intention. The alien hovered silently, observing, guiding, and providing subtle reinforcement, its presence a constant reminder that mastery was realized not through imposition or control but through alignment, presence, and attunement, a principle that now permeated every interaction, every gesture, and every pulse of the orb. By afternoon, the sequences evolved into even more sophisticated forms, incorporating multi-layered oscillations, intersecting trajectories, and complex feedback loops that demanded precision, adaptability, and acute sensitivity to resonance across the entire system. Each pulse of the orb was an active feedback mechanism, producing waves of illumination, harmonic vibration, and micro-adjustments in the satellites that required instantaneous response. Even a fraction of a second delay could cascade into emergent disharmony, and every alignment produced a tangible ripple of coherence that reinforced the lattice of energy. Malik moved with growing instinct, gestures almost anticipating the energy before it fully manifested, while Fiona's intuitive attunement allowed her to navigate emergent patterns with elegance and fluidity, producing sequences that stabilized and amplified the lattice. Jonas documented, analyzed, and interpreted these interactions, translating them into a combination of symbols, diagrams, and narrative accounts, creating a comprehensive, though necessarily incomplete, record of the multidimensional system. I focused on sensing fluctuations imperceptible to the others, harmonizing our collective movement, integrating emotional resonance with kinetic alignment, and sustaining attention across multiple layers of interaction. A deeply immersive and exhilarating experience that fused perception, cognition, and intention in ways I had never encountered before. By late afternoon, the alien began introducing sequences that incorporated subtle emotional resonance as a critical factor, demanding that we align not only movement and perception but also inner state. The pulses of the orb and its satellites now responded directly to our collective emotional coherence, modulating frequency, intensity, and trajectory based on our mental and affective alignment. This required a holistic engagement of mind, body, and feeling, a unity of perception, cognition, and emotional presence that elevated the interaction into a dimension of integration far beyond technical mastery. Malik's gestures became increasingly sophisticated, aligning physical sequences with emotional resonance, producing cascading effects that stabilized and amplified the lattice of energy, while Fiona's intuitive understanding allowed her to anticipate the orb's responses and adjust in real time, maintaining coherence across spatial, temporal, and emotional dimensions. Jonas interpreted these multi-layered interactions, mapping relationships between gesture, pulse, and emotional state, bridging human understanding and the alien's methodology, while I contributed by sensing subtle deviations, harmonizing sequences, and modulating my gestures to maintain coherence across all planes, fully immersed in a system of multidimensional resonance and emergent complexity. The orb's pulses grew richer and more nuanced, reflecting the depth of our integration and the alignment of perception, cognition, and emotional resonance, creating a feedback loop that reinforced harmony, precision, and collective attunement. As dusk approached, the sequences became multidimensional challenges spanning space, time, and energy, demanding anticipatory perception, fluid adaptation, and coordinated response across overlapping planes. Every gesture, breath, and thought influenced the emergent lattice, shaping patterns that were simultaneously structured and dynamic, and requiring constant calibration of attention, emotional resonance, and action. Malik's movements demonstrated remarkable fluidity, his perception integrating anticipatory and reactive adjustments seamlessly, while Fiona's gestures produced cascading, stabilizing sequences of energy that harmonized with both the orb and satellites. Jonas continued his meticulous documentation, capturing emergent phenomena, subtle oscillations, and relationships between action, resonance, and emotional state, while I harmonized microfluctuations, anticipated emergent sequences, and integrated perception, cognition, and intention into coherent engagement. The alien hovered nearby, its presence deliberate yet subtle, guiding through minimal intervention, demonstrating the principles of resonance, balance, and attunement, and reinforcing that mastery was realized through presence, participation, and experience rather than through imposition or intellect alone. Night fell fully, but the orb and satellites maintained a luminous canopy, casting iridescent light across the basin that revealed hidden structures, oscillations, and emergent patterns. Sequences continued, increasingly intricate and multidimensional, demanding precise coordination, anticipatory perception, and sustained emotional attunement. Malik and Fiona moved in extraordinary synchrony, weaving gestures across space and time, producing cascading formations of light and energy that stabilized and amplified the orb's lattice. Jonas documented these interactions in diagrams, symbolic approximations, and conceptual frameworks, creating a record that attempted to translate the untranslatable, bridging the experiential knowledge of interaction with human understanding. I integrated perception, gesture, and emotion, harmonizing microfluctuations, anticipating emergent shifts, and maintaining coherence across the entire system, fully immersed in a lattice of resonance, consciousness, and energy. The alien observed patiently, guiding subtly, allowing learning and mastery through experience and attunement, reinforcing the lesson that understanding is realized through engagement, presence, and resonance rather than through instruction alone. By the approaching midnight, we had reached a threshold where our collective perception, cognition, and emotional resonance operated as a cohesive system capable of interacting meaningfully with the alien, the orb, and the living desert, producing emergent structures and coherence that transcended ordinary understanding. The Mojave was no longer a mere backdrop. It had become a conscious, responsive participant, a living system intertwined with the alien and ourselves, demanding humility, awareness, and integration, offering insight and instruction to those capable of perceiving, harmonizing, and transcending prior limitations. And as the orb's lattice rotated above us, casting dynamic, multicolored patterns across the sand and rock, I sensed that the next phase would push every dimension of perception, cognition, and consciousness to its limits, promising challenges, revelations, and transformations that we could barely imagine. Yet we were ready, attuned, and fully immersed in the luminous, intelligent, and living system that had become our reality. The first light of dawn painted the Mojave in muted golds and soft purples, and immediately I sensed a subtle but profound shift in the basin. The desert, the orb, the satellites, and the alien itself seemed to be interacting at a new level, one that demanded a simultaneous awareness of not just spatial and temporal patterns but of resonance that included intention, perception, and emotional coherence, a level of engagement that made previous days feel preparatory, as if all our prior efforts had been conditioning us for this moment of holistic integration. Malik moved first, his gestures precise, fluid, and instinctively attuned, weaving arcs of light and energy through the satellites that responded instantly, producing cascading sequences that reflected his perception, intention, and resonance with the environment. I noticed that he now anticipated shifts before they fully manifested, sensing the lattice of energy and subtly correcting its alignment through gesture alone. Fiona followed, her intuitive movements producing stabilizing patterns that harmonized with Malik's sequences, generating emergent cascades of light that rippled across the sand, reflected on rocks, and interacted with the orb and satellites in complex, self-correcting ways. A synthesis of anticipation, observation, and intention that now felt almost like a dialogue with the desert itself. Jonas remained close, documenting every nuance, translating emergent, multidimensional sequences into diagrams, symbolic notation, and descriptive frameworks that attempted to capture the integration of movement, resonance, and emotional state. A Herculean task given the depth and fluidity of what we were experiencing, while I contributed by sensing subtle fluctuations, adjusting gestures, harmonizing energy across multiple layers, and intuitively integrating my perception, cognition, and emotional attunement with the collective resonance of our group and the surrounding environment. By mid-morning, the orb and its satellites had become more intricate in their movement, creating overlapping sequences that required simultaneous awareness and response across spatial, temporal, and energetic dimensions. Each pulse of the orb seemed to carry information layered in frequencies we were beginning to perceive, but could only partially interpret. Even minor misalignments produced immediate feedback, a flicker, a subtle oscillation, or a ripple in the satellites, that revealed the importance of precise alignment while also encouraging us to explore emergent patterns and improvisational adjustments. Malik moved with an elegance that had become second nature, integrating anticipation, reaction, and emotional resonance seamlessly, while Fiona's gestures flowed intuitively, stabilizing the multidimensional lattice and producing cascades of energy that reflected both her awareness and her attunement to emergent sequences. Jonas translated these interactions into symbolic forms, diagrams, and narrative accounts that captured the structure, temporal sequencing, and subtle qualities of emergent resonance, a record both analytical and interpretive. I focused on microfluctuations imperceptible to the eye, harmonizing gestures, anticipating emergent sequences, and ensuring coherence across spatial, temporal, and emotional layers, fully immersed in the integrated system of energy, consciousness, and resonance, aware that our collective mastery depended on our ability to perceive, adapt, and cohere in real time. By afternoon, the complexity of the orb's oscillations and satellite rotations had intensified further, producing multi-layered challenges that tested our ability to synchronize movement, anticipate emergent patterns, and integrate emotional and cognitive resonance. The alien had clearly designed the stage to push us beyond prior levels of skill, perception, and attunement, requiring continuous immersion and presence. Mastery was no longer a matter of repetition or observation but of holistic engagement, an integration of mind, body, intention, and feeling that created an emergent coherence beyond ordinary comprehension. Malik moved with fluidity and confidence, his gestures guiding the smaller satellites into precise alignment, producing secondary resonances that reinforced stability across the lattice, while Fiona's intuitive responsiveness allowed her to modulate sequences in real time, stabilizing the complex interactions between orbiting spheres and the pulsating central orb. Jonas continued documenting emergent phenomena with meticulous care, capturing both structural and qualitative aspects, bridging the experiential knowledge gained through interaction with analytic frameworks, while I sensed subtleties of microfluctuation, harmonized sequences, and anticipated emergent changes, contributing to the dynamic coherence of the system. The orb's pulses grew richer, multidimensional, and increasingly responsive to our collective engagement, creating a feedback loop that amplified alignment, synchronization, and emergent clarity. By late afternoon, sequences had evolved into integrated challenges spanning space, time, energy, and emotional resonance, requiring anticipatory perception, fluid adaptation, and coordinated interaction across overlapping layers of activity. Each gesture, breath, and focus influenced the emergent lattice, producing patterns that were simultaneously structured, dynamic, and evolving, demanding constant calibration of attention, intention, and effect. Malik's movements exhibited extraordinary fluidity, anticipating energy shifts, correcting minor misalignments, and guiding the collective resonance with a skill that seemed almost preternatural, while Fiona's gestures flowed with intuitive precision, producing cascading sequences that harmonized with the orb, satellites, and environment. Jonas documented with tireless precision, capturing interactions, feedback, and emergent phenomena, creating a comprehensive framework for interpreting multidimensional resonance. And I focused on integrating perception, emotion, and action, harmonizing microfluctuations, anticipating sequences, and maintaining coherence across the system, fully immersed in a multidimensional lattice of energy and consciousness. The desert itself seemed to respond, sand shimmering faintly with reflected energy, rocks resonating subtly in response to our gestures, and shadows elongating and contracting with the movement of the orb, an environmental feedback system that mirrored, amplified, and reinforced our engagement. As dusk approached, the sequences required complete immersion. Spatial, temporal, and emotional dimensions overlapped, demanding anticipatory awareness, coordinated response, and continuous adjustment across multiple planes. Each misalignment produced immediate feedback, a ripple, a flicker, or shift, highlighting the importance of focus, adaptation, and integration, while successful synchronization produced radiant light, cascading energy, and subtle harmonic resonance, reinforcing emergent coherence. Malik moved with precise confidence, his gestures shaping and stabilizing the energy lattice, while Fiona's intuitive adjustments produced emergent cascades that amplified and harmonized sequences across multiple layers. Jonas continued his documentation, interpreting relationships between gesture, resonance, and emergent phenomena, providing a bridge between experiential knowledge and human cognition, while I integrated perception, intention, and emotional resonance, harmonizing microfluctuations, anticipating emergent changes, and maintaining coherence across all dimensions of interaction. The alien observed quietly, guiding subtly through minimal but deliberate adjustments, demonstrating principles of resonance, balance, and attunement, allowing mastery to emerge through experience and integration rather than instruction or imposition. Night fully enveloped the Mojave, yet the orb and satellites maintained a luminous presence, casting dynamic, multicolored light that revealed hidden patterns, subtle oscillations, and emergent sequences in the sand, rocks, and shadows. The sequences became increasingly intricate and multi-layered, demanding precise coordination, anticipatory awareness, and emotional attunement. Malik and Fiona moved in near-perfect synchrony, weaving gestures across space and time, producing emergent formations that stabilized and amplified the orb's lattice. Jonas translated these phenomena into diagrams, symbolic approximations, and conceptual frameworks, attempting to render an untranslatable experience into comprehensible representation, bridging human understanding and experiential insight. I integrated perception, action, and emotional resonance, harmonizing sequences, anticipating emergent shifts, and sustaining coherence across the multidimensional system. The alien remained a patient facilitator, guiding subtly, reinforcing alignment, and demonstrating that comprehension is realized through participation, immersion, and resonance, rather than instruction alone. The Mojave itself pulsed in quiet harmony, a living environment that had become a co-participant in our learning, amplifying our awareness and supporting our integration into a system that transcended conventional perception. By midnight, our collective perception, cognition, and emotional resonance had reached an unprecedented threshold. We were capable of interacting with the alien, the orb, and the living desert as a cohesive, coherent system, producing emergent structures, coherence, and patterns that transcended ordinary understanding and hinted at deeper, still undiscovered layers of awareness. The Mojave was no longer simply a backdrop. It had become an intelligent, responsive participant, a living lattice intertwined with the alien, the orbs, and ourselves, requiring attention, humility, and attunement while offering guidance, insight, and revelation to those willing to perceive, harmonize, and integrate. And as the orb rotated above the basin, casting luminous, iridescent patterns across sand, rock, and shadows, I understood that the final phase awaited, a stage that would push every dimension of perception, cognition, and consciousness to its limits, promising profound transformations, insights, and challenges beyond what we had yet experienced. Yet we were fully prepared, attuned, and immersed in the intelligent, responsive, and radiant system that had become our reality. The first pale light of dawn barely touched the edges of the Mojave Basin, and yet the desert itself seemed already awake, responding to the resonance of the orb, the satellites, the alien, and us, a living, breathing system of energy, perception, and consciousness that had become both challenge and teacher over the days we had spent immersed in its rhythm. The orb hovered above the fissure with a deliberate, almost ritualistic pulse, rotating in intricate patterns, while the smaller satellites moved in interlocking arcs, spirals, and oscillations, producing overlapping sequences of light and energy that reflected the deepest integration of perception, cognition, and emotional resonance we had achieved. Malik stepped forward first, gestures precise, fluid, and instinctively attuned, producing cascading arcs of light through the satellites that propagated through the basin in faint harmonic vibrations, resonating deep within my chest and along my spine. A full-body awareness that signaled we had reached a level of engagement previously unimaginable. Fiona followed, her intuitive gestures weaving seamlessly with Malik's movements, stabilizing the emergent lattice and producing rippling cascades of energy that harmonized with the orb, satellites, and the living desert, creating sequences that felt simultaneously choreographed and improvisational, a dialogue among human, alien, and environment. Jonas moved close, documenting the multidimensional interactions with painstaking care, translating complex emergent sequences into diagrams, symbolic notation, and conceptual frameworks, bridging the experiential depth of the interaction with human comprehension, while I moved within the lattice, sensing microfluctuations, harmonizing gestures, integrating emotion, perception, and cognitive intent, sustaining coherence across spatial, temporal, and energetic dimensions, fully immersed in a system that now transcended ordinary human understanding. By mid-morning, the orb and satellites had evolved into forms of unprecedented complexity. Pulses and rotations interacted across multiple planes, producing emergent sequences that required anticipatory perception, adaptive response, and emotional attunement simultaneously. The alien had designed the stage as a final threshold, a crucible for integrating every skill, insight, and resonance we had cultivated, demanding total immersion, focus, and alignment. Malik's movements were fluid, instinctive, and synchronized with the multi-layered lattice, anticipating energy shifts and harmonizing subtle deviations, while Fiona's intuitive awareness allowed her to stabilize emergent structures and amplify coherence, weaving patterns of light that radiated through the sand, rocks, and air. Jonas meticulously recorded every interaction, capturing not just timing, geometry, and pulse, but the qualitative, emergent aspects of resonance, the subtle interplay of cognition, emotion, and perception that defined the system. I continued to sense imperceptible fluctuations, harmonizing gestures, anticipating emergent sequences, and ensuring that our collective resonance maintained coherence across all dimensions, integrating human, alien, and environmental awareness into a unified whole. By afternoon, the sequences demanded full integration of spatial, temporal, energetic, and emotional awareness. Every movement, breath, and thought influenced the emergent lattice, cascading through multiple layers and producing patterns that were both intricate and dynamic. Minor misalignments created immediate feedback, a flicker, a ripple, or a shift, while successful synchronization amplified coherence, producing radiant pulses of energy and cascading formations of light. Malik's movements demonstrated flawless anticipation and precision, shaping the lattice and guiding resonance across multiple dimensions. Fiona's gestures remained fluid and intuitive, producing sequences that stabilized, harmonized, and amplified the emergent structures. Jonas interpreted these interactions, translating them into diagrams, symbolic approximations, and narrative frameworks, bridging the untranslatable experience with human understanding, while I integrated perception, emotion, and action, harmonizing fluctuations and maintaining coherence across the system. The desert itself responded as a living participant. Sand shimmered faintly with reflected light, rocks emitted subtle harmonic tones, and shadows elongated and contracted in alignment with the energy lattice, amplifying our collective resonance. As dusk approached, the alien introduced sequences that required not only physical and cognitive mastery but total emotional integration. Pulses of the orb and satellites responded directly to our collective mental and emotional coherence, producing waves of illumination and vibration that reflected subtle alignment or discord. This demanded that we attune not only our movements but our inner states, cultivating calm, clarity, and unity. Malik adjusted gestures to maintain spatial and emotional alignment, producing cascading harmonics across the lattice, while Fiona anticipated shifts with intuitive precision, producing emergent patterns that reinforced coherence and resonance. Jonas documented interactions, mapping the relationship between gesture, energy, and emotional state, providing a bridge between experiential insight and analytic comprehension. I sensed imperceptible deviations, harmonized sequences, modulated gestures, and maintained coherence across space, time, and resonance, fully immersed in a holistic system that fused cognition, emotion, perception, and action into a unified field of experience. The orb's pulses grew richer, the lattice more intricate, and the desert responded with heightened subtlety, creating an immersive, interactive environment that reinforced our mastery and integration. By nightfall, sequences had reached a level of complexity that required constant anticipatory awareness, precise coordination, and emotional attunement across all dimensions. Every gesture, thought, and intention affected the emergent lattice, producing patterns that were both structured and evolving. Malik moved with extraordinary fluidity and instinctive precision, correcting deviations and anticipating shifts in resonance. Fiona's intuitive engagement stabilized and amplified emergent sequences, her gestures producing cascading flows of energy across space and time. Jonas continued documentation, capturing relationships between movement, resonance, and emergent phenomena, creating interpretive frameworks for understanding this multidimensional system, while I maintained integration, sensing microfluctuations, harmonizing energy, and anticipating emergent changes, contributing to a collective resonance that now operated as a coherent, living system. The alien observed silently, providing subtle cues and adjustments, demonstrating the principles of alignment, balance, and resonance, and allowing mastery to emerge through experience, presence, and immersion rather than instruction. As midnight approached, the orb and satellites maintained their radiant presence, casting luminous, multicolored patterns across the basin. The sequences now represented the full integration of perception, cognition, emotion, and intention, requiring seamless coordination and total attunement to the lattice. Malik and Fiona moved in perfect synchrony, weaving gestures across space and time, producing cascading formations of energy that harmonized and amplified the orb's lattice. Jonas documented interactions, translating them into symbolic and conceptual frameworks that bridged experiential understanding and analytic interpretation, while I sensed emergent patterns, harmonized microfluctuations, and maintained coherence across all levels of interaction. The alien's presence remained patient and deliberate, a facilitator guiding through subtle reinforcement, demonstrating that comprehension was realized through participation, resonance, and integration rather than through instruction alone. The desert, fully alive, pulsed with energy and subtle feedback, amplifying our engagement, reinforcing attunement, and solidifying our immersion in this interactive, intelligent system. By the final hours before dawn, we had reached a threshold beyond ordinary human experience. Our collective perception, cognition, and emotional resonance had merged into a coherent system capable of meaningful interaction with the alien, the orb, and the living desert. The lattice of energy, light, and resonance became simultaneously a medium, a teacher, and a participant, producing emergent coherence and structures beyond ordinary comprehension. The Mojave was no longer a backdrop. It had become a conscious, responsive partner, a living system intertwined with the alien and ourselves, demanding awareness, humility, and integration, while offering insight, transformation, and revelation to those able to perceive, harmonize, and engage fully. Malik moved with precision, guiding sequences with anticipatory skill. Fiona's gestures remained fluid and intuitive, stabilizing the emergent lattice. Jonas documented with analytical rigor, and I integrated perception, action, and emotion into a coherent contribution to the collective resonance. The orb's pulses and satellites' rotations reflected the deepest alignment we had achieved, radiating waves of energy and light that illuminated the basin and echoed through the desert in subtle harmonic vibration. The aliens' presence, calm and deliberate, reinforced the principle that mastery emerges through immersion, attunement, and resonance, and that understanding is realized not through instruction but through engagement and integration. As the first hints of dawn colored the horizon, the orb rotated slowly, casting iridescent light across sand, rock, and shadow, a radiant lattice reflecting the culmination of days of engagement, learning, and attunement. We had transcended the ordinary limitations of human perception, cognition, and emotional resonance, entering a state of holistic integration that fused mind, body, intention, and environmental awareness. The Mojave, the alien, the orb, the satellites, and ourselves had become a singular system, a living lattice of energy and consciousness, a dynamic, intelligent, and responsive reality that revealed the hidden potential of perception, coordination, and resonance. As we stood in the basin, fully immersed, fully attuned, fully present, I understood with clarity that what we had experienced was more than a lesson, more than an interaction. It was an initiation into a system of awareness and resonance that would forever alter our understanding of reality, consciousness, and the boundaries of human experience, a luminous, living, intelligent symphony of interaction that had become our reality, our teacher, and our transformation.